that's the disclaimer. It's up there for posterity's sake. I'll discuss the recording in just a second here. So instructions and ground rules, and this is probably a little bit more important for our virtual attendees versus our in-person ones. But this meeting is being recorded mostly for our kind of note-taking purposes and workshop summary report purposes. I believe we will post part of the recording for those who weren't able to attend today, and in case anyone needs to go back. And then for those who are online, we just ask that you please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. And if you're not a presenter, please keep your camera turned off. However, we will encourage the use of cameras during Q&A as well as breakout sessions later in the day. A quick note about the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. I'm not going to go through every single one of these bullets, but I will note that this effort is not part of a federal advisory committee. We cannot provide advice. We are not driving towards consensus. You can almost look at this as sort of a live request for information, if you will. DOE is seeking information, whether or not it acts on the information that is provided today. We make no promises. So just a note about FACA there. We have a pretty packed agenda. After my remarks, I'm going to introduce our Executive Director, Sheila Hollis, to say a few words about USCA. And then I'll pass it over to Ricky McCollum to give you all kind of a welcome and introduction to the UT Research Park. And then we'll go into a series of presentations from DOE, starting with the importance of carbon capture and conversion to decarbonization. Unfortunately, Mark Akevich was not able to make it today, so luckily we have Amishi Claros to step in his shoes. And then we'll have DOE remarks on societal considerations and impacts from Dr. Christie Vieder. Then carbon conversion processes and technologies from Dr. Joe Stofa. And then we'll take a short 15-minute break, kind of recharge the batteries a little bit. And then we'll go into another presentation from Amishi. Are you doing that one, or is Aaron going to do that one?
I think I'm going to do this.
You're going to do that one as well. Okay. On carbon conversion and the IIJA or BIL initiatives and grants that have come out in the last year and will be coming out soon. And then we'll go into kind of our first breakout session of the day. Sorry, I'm going to admit a couple more people. Going to go into our first breakout session of the day where we discuss kind of the technology and societal considerations and impacts. And then lunch, unfortunately, will be on your own due to various contracting rules. We're not allowed to pay for lunch for our attendees. Luckily, there is a Cuban style food truck, and sorry. No.
I apologize. It's supposed to start down for
What were you saying?
We'll bring sandwiches.
Okay.
Anybody have any dietary restrictions? Then we need no.
Well, okay. Thank you for that. All right. Okay. Great. And then after lunch, we'll have Dr. Greg Hackett give us a presentation on techno-economic analysis. And then Matt Jameson will give us a presentation on life cycle analysis. We'll have another short kind of roundtable discussion on those topics. And then our last break of the day, and then we'll go into kind of regional highlights and opportunities, where we have Dr. David Wood discussing CCUS opportunities for CO2 derived carbon nanostructures via molten carbonate electrolysis. I was an international studies major, so a lot of that goes like way over my head. and that was a mouthful, but I think that's going to be a really exciting presentation. Then we have Bill Easter from Sun Plastics to discuss carbon conversion opportunities. ORNL's Dr. Michelle Hitter to give a view of the regional carbon conversion landscape. And then Eric Funkhauser from Columbia University to discuss some national partnership opportunities for some of our regional stakeholders. Should be pretty exciting as well. So with that, I'm going to shut up and stop talking. And I am going to pass it over to USCA's Acting Executive Director, Sheila Hollis. Sheila, thank you so much for joining us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and I wish I was there with you in person, but we're getting used to this video chat here. So let me give you a quick overview of what USCA is and does. We've been around for nearly 100 years. We represent in nonprofit, non-lobbying, non-partisan way most of the energy industry, and that includes the national labs and a variety of other players, educational institutions, Edison Electric Institute, American Gas Association, and a variety of other active, vibrant, and critical parts of the energy system in America and beyond. We do that education and convening a la what we're doing here today. But beyond that, these 104 countries we work in throughout the world, we're working from Uganda to Ukraine, South America, Central America, and we've been doing that for basically since the fall of the wall. We are very active with respect to the enhancement and support of women in energy and environment, and we have several programs related to that. And we put on some very good programs which may be useful to you. It's since we've gone mainly online. It's easy to do. We've got a big meeting coming up shortly, Advanced Energy Technology Forum, where major trade institutions, but educational and government institutions will be on with us for that program too. That'll be in later in September. We are committed to supporting and assisting the Department of Energy in all of its efforts to deal with the carbon issue. The sad reality of life is that we produce a lot of carbon and we don't know quite what to do with it, but certainly DOE is taking those major steps to deal with the realities of what we have already and going forward as to how to make the world cleaner, safer, better, and to employ and deploy individuals and entities so that they too can participate in this evolving and hopefully brighter and lower carbon world that we're moving towards. We thank you so much for joining us today, and big thanks to DOE and to Alex for his hard work, and for all the people that are devoting their time and effort to this enormously important issue. And we thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to stick around as long as I can online here with you, and have a wonderful, successful day. And next time, maybe the sandwiches will be on us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. It's great working with you and the USCA team, and always appreciate the opportunity and appreciate you making the time to join us today. With that, I am going to pass the mic over to Ricky McCollum, Vice President here at the UT Research Park at Cherokee Farm.
Alex, thank you. Good morning. I wanted to officially welcome everybody this morning here in the room to Knoxville, Tennessee. For those of you joining virtually, thank you for giving us a little bit of your time to join us here for this incredible conference. The Department of Energy relationship with the University of Tennessee is incredibly important, along with our other partners in the Tennessee Valley Authority and other great partners that are helping us build out the ecosystem for what we want to achieve here at the UT Research Park. So we want to thank each of you for giving us a little bit of time to travel here. Hope today is going to be a good conference. A couple of housekeeping items real quick in case anyone needs to go to the restroom for those of you that are here in the room. Bathrooms are located just outside the door on the left and right of the elevators. We do have a lot of coffee outside, so if you've not got any, please make sure we drink all of that stuff up. As Angeli mentioned, we will be having sandwiches delivered in. So we'll have all that stuff around lunchtime for you. And the other thing is if you need to have Wi-Fi, we do have a Wi-Fi service here for each of you that you can get online. I've got a card that will tell you the instructions for how to do that, to log into the system. I'll leave that with Alex and distribute that as you all are needed. Real quick, the mission and vision for the UT Research Park is really simple. We want to be the gateway to collaboration between the university, the private sector, and the small startup ecosystem that is within this region. Two very important programs that we have here at the Research Park is a program called the Spark Innovation Center. This is a ecosystem that was built about 3 years ago to help support the small startups that are generating from not only the university, but the region itself. We have a unique opportunity of having some pretty unique and incredible lab space. And so we want to be able to provide those small startup companies with the resources and direction that they need to help grow their company, help grow their IP, or whatever their goals typically may be. We have an entrepreneur in residence that kind of helps us mentor our companies to get them ready for their pitch competitions and those type of things. So they have all the resources and stuff needed to be able to help grow their company. So that we want to be able to keep those companies that may be here visiting here in the region. This is very complementary to our partners at Oak Ridge National Laboratory with the programs that they do. And so we want to make sure that we're continuing to build that ecosystem. One other achievement that we had from developing the Spark Innovation Center was the creation of a clean tech accelerator. This is a 12-week program that we've started here that is just coming to the completion of 12 companies that were here from across the country for the last 12 weeks that are doing similar things in their companies and helping grow and getting resources. And we're hoping to attract a few of those companies to also stay here within the region permanently. And so that's our part in this, and not only being an asset to the university and growing the research enterprise that we have on campus, but also having an opportunity to build some pretty magnificent buildings like the one that you're in today that will house not only the research and capabilities of the university, but we also are recruiting and attracting the private sector that are interested in partnering and being a part of that research collaboration and development. So we want to thank you all for your time today. Enjoy the amenities. I hate that we didn't dial in the better weather because the property is pretty spectacular in the river view. So if you get a chance to get out at some point and it's not raining, I encourage you to do that. It's pretty spectacular. So Alex, I'll hand it back to you. If y'all need anything the rest of the day, we're here.
Great. Thank you so much, Ricky, and thank you to you and your team for hosting us today. Very much appreciate it, and look forward to having the rest of the workshop here. So with that, Amishi, the floor is yours. I'm going to pull up your presentation, so just give me 1 second here.
Gonna be tough.
Alex, yeah. I was gonna say-
Yeah.
Can we get lines down? Lights off.
Guess it is a little tough to see. It's gonna be tough to follow those two speakers in that warm intro. And I'm not Mark, but I will pretend to be him. He's very stoic when he speaks. And someone actually earlier today said, when I speak, I'm cool as a cucumber. And I'm like, that's not truly what's going on. I like black out whenever I talk in front of people. So there's like going to be chaotic energy and it's not going to be Mark, but be prepared. But this is actually a presentation that we go over a carbon management technology overview. So it's broader. It's about the entire office itself. Just for intro, my name is Amishi. You will hear from me again, but talking more in the capacity of the carbon conversion program later. So carbon management technologies, we'll go over our name change and our R&D programs, but we'll also hit on our funding processes, which I think are very important for this conversation, as well as some other engagement opportunities, such as internships and fellowships. A big fan of those. So I'm going to move this real quick. Not away. So you may have noticed in the last year or so, I think it's been over a year now, we changed from fossil energy, so DOE FE to DOE FECM. So it's fossil energy and carbon management. Joe does a very good job of saying it's not carbon management for fossil energy, it's carbon management in itself. This was a really big change from what we had historically been investing in. Our investments into R&D, into this broader energy space, had been really geared towards fossil energy or some way involved in increasing the efficiency, decarbonizing fossil energy, or having some connection to fossil. As we've created this Office of Carbon Management, it is carbon management in itself. It is not applied to fossil energy. It has some applicability, but we look at carbon management very broadly across all sectors, and it aligns with President Biden's goal and reflects the new vision for the office. So President Biden's goals are about 50% reductions by 2030. So carbon-free emissions, carbon-free power sector by 2035, and net zero emissions for the economy no later than 2050. So these are really aggressive goals, and CCUS, or carbon management, plays an important role in achieving all three. So FECM is now structured like so. This is pretty new, and I think it works really well for our R&D programs. So we have a couple priority areas within the Office of Carbon Management. That's the majority of people that will be speaking today. And we have something we've kept around for quite a few years. It's our point source carbon capture team. Previously, our point source R&D investments were heavily focused on coal emissions or point sources such as, we expanded a little bit into natural gas. Now our point sources are a lot more agnostic in their view. We're looking at coal, we're looking at natural gas and industrial applications. Carbon dioxide removal is a completely new program that's been stood up, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. CO2 conversion into products is something that we'll be discussing deeply today. This is the program that I am a program manager for. Joe is the technology manager for. Aaron helps. He's a program engineer for that as well. So this is really what we're going to be digging into. And we also have another part of our program that's been around for a very long time, almost as long as carbon capture. It's our reliable storage team. They're also expanding to look at transportation under this new structure. So that's a great new space for them to expand into. We also have carbon-free hydrogen production. So looking at CCUS or carbon management technologies applied to hydrogen. There's another office that was restructured as well. That's the Office of Resource Sustainability. And we have really interesting work going on with critical materials and mineral space, as well as methane mitigation. All of these are working towards a set of common goals. We're looking to create good paying jobs. We're hoping to accelerate these jobs. We want healthy transitions, especially in communities that have been heavily reliant on fossil fuels. Right, so I mentioned our strategic vision. You can actually access it online. It's a much smaller document than we usually put out. I think it's about like 30 pages. It's honestly, I think, a very good read. If you have time, I would suggest reading it. It's got a lot of pictures, it's not so long, and it really distills down the intention of what we're trying to do with our investments. We're looking to advance justice, labor, and engagement. We want to advance our technologies towards this deep decarbonization and advance our technologies to lead to a sustainable energy resource.
Are you sure all these slides can be available to us?
Oh, absolutely. We will definitely make these slides available. This is all public access for sure. So diving a little bit more into the technologies, CCUS and CDR are our technologies that we invest in through our R&D, so research and development program lines. We want to facilitate deep decarbonization, so that means investment across the entire value chain. One of our biggest programs has actually been storage and capture. On the capture side, we've looked at power sector. That's been a large investment, and now we're diversifying into the industrial sector. Carbon dioxide removal is also a new area that we're expanding into, and I'll talk a little bit more about what what's the difference between carbon dioxide removal and capture. And we're also expanding into taking our R&D that we've invested in our technologies and doing more design studies and demonstrations, so scaling them up along the TRL scale. We also want to develop low carbon supply chains. So that's this conversion program where we create products that can actually be used into the economy. So CO2 isn't just captured and put underground in some either EOR or saline storage, but rather it can re-enter the economy through a commodity of sorts, whether it's aggregates, it can be fuels and chemicals, it can even be solid carbon products, which I think we'll have a presentation on later today. And we're also working to optimize geologic storage. This is the storage program, again, 2 decades worth of R&D, and we're looking to expand our carbon safe initiative, understand the geomechanics of storing. This is really large scale mitigation, and looking also to convert fossil assets and enable real-time decision-making through AI. What you see on the right side, or I guess, yeah, the right side for you guys as well, is the Carbon Safe Initiative. This is one of the biggest partnerships that Carbon Safe has created, and it comes in phases 1 through 4, and we have active phases 2 and 3. This is where we're looking to really work with regional areas, and we've seen a lot of success in this structure, where we realize that geology in particular is regionally complex. So working and empowering those on the ground through these regional partnerships and now carbon safe initiatives, it's the best way to get the money out and actually create wells and active storage sites. So that's something that we really have learned a lot from within the program. Just as an overview, here are the R&D budget lines. As you can see, we have a very healthy budget. It's grown exponentially, well, not exponentially, but it's growing at a very fast rate. The bottom bar on the bottom, that's blue. That's the carbon capture budget. It's stayed pretty steady at about $100 or more million a year. That's a lot of money. In the years that it drops, like 21 and 22, it actually wasn't that much of a drop. What you saw was the creation of carbon dioxide removal. It's a different type, a different perspective on capture, a different intention, but it was grouped under capture for a very long time, or for the last 2 years. So it actually wasn't that much of a decrease in the capture budget. So capture is one of the most expensive parts of carbon management, hence it's received a lot of money. Carbon storage, that's the middle orange bar, has also been increasing in funds. This last request was 122 million, and this is the carbon safe initiatives. These are the partnerships. These are infrastructure heavy, deployment ready, large mitigation volumes of work that are being executed. So hence they need a lot of money. What you see in the middle is carbon conversion or carbon utilization. We've been changing our name. Utilization was what we were called. Conversion is what we will be called from moving forward. And that's the green bar. It's smaller, started at 10, 12, 21, 23, but now it's looking at 50. That's been an exponential increase. Utilization, right, is a growing TRL technology. Joe will talk about it more. That work right now is funding smaller projects. Hence, we can do a lot with, considerably less money. But the rate that it's been growing is super promising. Carbon dioxide removal has absolutely blown up what happens to usual R&D programs. Usually they start at that couple million and grow. Carbon dioxide removal has started at 40 million and continues to grow exponentially. So point source capture, I kind of talked about it already, since it's not a strong emphasis of this workshop. For the interest of time, I'll keep moving. CDR is something I wanted to talk about a little bit more. CDR is carbon dioxide removal. Carbon dioxide removal is really a whole system. It can be direct air capture. It can be direct ocean capture. It can even be bikers, so biomass with carbon removal and storage, or accelerated weathering or enhanced mineralization. These are all mechanisms to get to this CDR system. The concept of CDR is take that CO2, you can capture it from the air, the ocean, you capture it through biomass. And the part that makes it true CDR is you need to store it away from the atmosphere. Once you can accurately prove and verify that that CO2 has been removed and it's additional, then you can consider that a CDR technology. In our CDR program line, we look at direct air capture in particular. We have a lot of obviously capture technology experience. So CDR, direct air capture is an extension of that, obviously with a different suite of challenges compared to point source. The carbon negative shot is something else we wanted to address. So carbon negative shot is an earth shot that came out of the Department of Energy. Carbon negative shot really looks at creating true CDR with the 4 carbon dioxide removal with the 4 elements listed on your left there. So we're looking to store or remove CO2 at $100 per net metric ton for both capture and storage, so that whole supply chain. We want to do a robust accounting of the full life cycle emissions. Again, we want to verify that it's truly removed, it's additive in nature. We want high quality, durable storage with demonstrated for RMV. Oh, sorry, that was a hard sentence for me. For at least 100 years. You can read it. I'm not going to try that again. And we want the carbon negative shot to enable a whole industry. So we're looking at gigaton scale. So the carbon negative shot is our way to energize the carbon removal economy, similar to our hydrogen shot, which is really looking to stand up a whole hydrogen industry. We are trying to make carbon removals part of the equation. What you see on the right is it's not quite like numerically, it's an illustrative example, I guess, is the best way to put it. It's an illustrative example of the costs associated with both with 2 different types of CDR. Direct air capture, a lot of the costs are associated up front, but the MRV costs are a lot smaller, which is, throughout the end of life for DAC. Soil carbon sequestration, right? It can be cheaper in the beginning, but what you will invest in is MRV throughout the course of that CDR soil carbon project's life. So it's a good illustrative example to show that it's not really fair to say that one type of CDR technology is cheaper than the other. It's just an allocation of costs can happen at different times. All right, I won't dive into the carbon transport too much since it's not the intention of this presentation, and I know we're a little over, but I do want to spend a little bit more time on carbon conversion or utilization. As mentioned, we started to change our name. Yet again, we were carbon use and reuse at one point, carbon utilization, and now we're switching to carbon conversion. I actually really like this name change. I think it's more representative of what the program really aims to do. What you'll see on the bottom right of this diagram is working fluids. We're not looking to take that CO2 and use it in an EOR or like in a power cycle. What we're looking to do is convert that molecule itself into something that's valuable. There's 3 pathways to do that. You can feed it to algae, you can mineralize it into a building material perhaps, and you can actually convert it into fuels and chemicals through usually a catalytic pathway. I won't go into the challenges too deeply. Joe has a whole presentation on that, and we'll do it very effectively over more than a minute. So I just wanted to give this higher level overview. All right, so there's a couple of policy and regulatory aspects that our office also works hand in hand with. The bottom 3 are actually more for carbon capture and storage, the conventional, capture that CO2 and put it underground perspective. I want to highlight the 45Q tax credit. 45Q tax credit is one of the pathways in which utilization technologies or conversion technologies can actually get federal policies and federal incentives. I will talk about that a little bit more in my presentation later. Little tee up. All right, BOAs. This is where hopefully this information will be a little bit informative for this crowd here. Usually in the FOA process, the first step people usually embark on is following the money. There's lots of nonprofits that also follow the money and lay out where the investments have come in. But we get, direction from the House and the Senate. We also provide our direction via the president's report And then finally, that money is appropriated to us and often has some blend of all of these directions. Once we finally get the money in hand, which sometimes takes a while, which is why things are delayed often, is if we're in a CR, we don't have a budget, we can't technically spend it until we have some certainty. We can actually start structuring our opportunity or our solicitation. Once that solicitation is out, we don't talk to anyone. We can't provide any advice, but that's when you all can start applying for that solicitation. And there's a very structured evaluation and criteria that goes on with how we select projects, but we want to make it, fair and equitable, not like Joe and I can be like, we're friends with them and like them. That's not exactly how it happens. You would think so with how people ask us questions, but that's not. They're like, can we get cash? No, you can't. There's like everything else in the government, there's a lot of hurdles and paperwork, and it's very official. But after we make our selections, we start negotiating the awards. Again, this is a cooperative agreement. So what happens with a cooperative agreement? That it's not just a contract for you to execute, an X widget. It's more of an agreement between both the parties to work together to achieve the goals that you've laid out. So during that negotiation and during the whole length of the project award, there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of collaboration and cooperation and conversation that really happens between FECM, Netl, and the project recipient. So I think that's really important to understand, that it's not just a handing of funds and you go off and execute what needs to be done. Really, it is a very collaborative partnership. And then finally, hopefully there's successes and we advance the technology. We measure the progress that the project has had. So this full process has been executed many times, and we will be having a lot more FOAs coming out, especially with the IIJA or the bill funding. Here's a great place to have saved. It's our solicitation page at Netl. There's actually a whole solicitation page for bill, so IIJA FOAs. So we have our annual appropriations, which come out every year. They follow that, House, Senate, President appropriation pathway. And then we have the bill money. So that's like this huge influx of cash that came at once. Right. So that'll also be on this page. And those are our questions. Did want to hit fellowships and internships while we're here. We have a lot of fellowships available. They're STP ORISE fellowships. I've started at FECM under a fellowship. If you have students that are interested in joining, please talk to us. And there's also internships available every summer for students that are in college to postdocs as well. And those are Mickey Leland fellowships. And I could not speak enough praise to all of our Mickey Leland interns. They're fantastic. Well, and I think that's it for Mark. I know we're a little old.
Are those fellowships just for DOE?
Yeah, absolutely. So the SDP or the ORISE fellowships are usually a year or two at headquarters or at Netl. Actually, I believe it's just maybe at headquarters, pardon. So at Fossil Energy Carbon Management, you can actually apply for any of the federal programs that are in DOE, so solar energy, but that student then works at DOE headquarters for a year, sometimes two, and they help learn about the policy scape. They usually have a deep dive into a topic, but it's really educational, and they come out having learned quite a lot about the federal space and how that works. The Mickey Lelands are also sent to either Netl or FECM. And that really targets getting more diverse candidates into the federal workplace, but they work on campus with us or virtually, I guess, in the last 2 years. And they really tackle a singular project over the course of 10 weeks. But those are for us to kind of recruit and get different perspectives into our programs. Any other questions?
And I don't see any questions online either. So with that, thank you, Amishi. If we could give Amishi another round of applause. I do want to note that Amishi is a USCA alum, so I think that says a lot about USCA, or it doesn't because they replaced her with me. So also on a more serious note, regarding the FOAs that Amishi was discussing, USCA as well as DOE FECM, we had a series of regional workshops earlier this year, which were meant to be kind of educational for anyone who was interested in applying for the various carbon management FOAs that will be coming out, or that are coming out, will be coming out. Those workshops were recorded. We also had a webinar that was recorded, and part of that, there's a good, I think, 20 to 40 minute section on doing business with DOE and doing business with NETL, which I think for those who are new to the space is super useful. So if that would be of interest, please feel free to check out our website, usca.org. The recordings are posted on there. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. So with that, we are going to go on to our next presentation. Dr. Christie Vieder from the U.S. Department of Energy. Well, Christie, let me pull up your presentation here and make space for you. Sorry, we're just going to set up the lavalier mic. So just give us one moment.
That okay? Yep. Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's really good to be with you here today. This is my first in-person event since 2019. So it's really nice to be with people in person. My name is Christie Vieder. I work in DOE's Office of Policy on the Energy Jobs team. I've been coordinating very closely with certain program offices on their bipartisan infrastructure law implementation, including especially FECM. And I'm here today to share with you about a framework that the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office have developed to improve the processes and outcomes of all the different carbon management utilization programs, as well as many other programs that FECM is undertaking. This framework is called the Societal Considerations and Impacts Framework, and it works with and supports the technical and economic aspects of the carbon conversion procurement grant program and FECM's programs overall. The SCI framework has 4 components: diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is the first, then community and stakeholder engagement, Justice 40 initiative, and quality jobs. And I'll spend some time talking about each of them in more detail as we progress. Let's see. I also wanted to offer perspective on why we developed the SCI framework. We wanted to create a formal structure for how we think about and actualize the concept on the previous slide because of how much equity and justice are at the center of the Biden-Harris administration's priorities, especially around environmental and energy work. Since taking office, President Biden has instructed his administration to advance and integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in our programs and policies. The White House has also been very clear in its support for the value of creating good jobs with equitable access for all workers and the free and fair choice to join a union. All of these things are foundational to DOE's and FECM's work and to the administration overall. The Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, in support of the administration's values, has created its own strategic vision, as Amishi was talking about, for how we're approaching diversity, accessibility, worker equity, and inclusive stakeholder engagement. And it's about incorporating justice principles into all aspects of FECM's work, including meaningful outreach to communities, especially disadvantaged communities, making sure that benefits are shared equally, making sure that we're working to remediate the harms that communities have experienced in the past while finding ways to create better projects going forward. This is work that we're very proud to be doing, and we want you to know how much we value your interest in taking this on with us. Over the next few slides, I'll be talking about each of the 4 SCI components in greater detail, starting with diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So one of the first things that President Biden did when he took office was to issue the executive order on advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government. And the executive order states that the federal government should pursue a comprehensive approach to advancing equity for all, including people of color and others who have been historically underserved, marginalized, and adversely affected by persistent poverty and inequality. Each agency was directed to prioritize advancing DEIA, and that was a key factor in developing this component of the SCI framework. To look more closely at what each part of DEIA is about, diversity is about welcoming and engaging people from all backgrounds and creating a workforce that looks like all of America. Equity is about making sure that people are treated fairly and impartially, and taking steps to mitigate biases and barriers, making sure that there's parity in everybody's opportunity to advance in their career. Inclusion focuses on creating the environment where everyone feels welcome, supported, and feeling like their skills are fully utilized. And accessibility is about creating programs and services that all people, including those with disabilities, can fully and independently use. The goal of all this is to access the full benefits that a strong approach to DEIA can make possible. Things like having a more productive team, because people feel valued and can take more ownership for their success and the company's success. Bringing more folks from underrepresented groups into STEM careers, which in turn can help more people from diverse backgrounds follow in their footsteps. Creating better designed projects because those projects were developed with input and support from the communities that they're based in. And, you know, these are just a few. I'm sure you can all think of other different types of similar benefits as well. Let's see, many of you may have already been taking the time to develop a comprehensive approach to DEIA, but for those of you who may be at an earlier stage in that process, a good place to begin is to think about why you want to address these issues, separate and apart from any potential federal requirements or encouragements. What outcomes for DEIA do you think align most strongly with your organization's values? That's always a really good place to start thinking. The next step can be to assess how you're approaching DEIA pathways and processes to achieve the priorities that you're identifying. Figure out how you're performing in those areas and where, you know, there could be opportunity for improvement. Figure out what goals it's going to take to get you there. And in thinking about goals, we encourage everybody to consider using the SMART framework, where SMART, the acronym, each letter stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This is a tool that we find to be really useful in achieving all different kinds of outcomes, and certainly DEIA outcomes. And finally, designing the strategies that can make all of this happen, looping in your team members on this, and giving them a chance to provide input throughout the different phases of these steps, we think will probably be really helpful in getting you where you want to go. Next, I'm going to spend some time talking about community and stakeholder engagement. As you can imagine, ideas around DEIA are very closely connected to how we engage with communities and different kinds of stakeholders. Acknowledging the importance of inclusion and accessibility leads to the question of how does the project that I'm interested in starting impact the community around it? A fair amount of research has been done on this subject of public participation, including in the subsector of carbon management. And the questions that regularly come up among stakeholders are things like, how can we have a say in this process? Who's in charge? If some things goes wrong, can we trust the project developers to address any of those issues? What are the benefits of this project going to be to our community? And does this project fit in with, how we live and do things here? Some of these questions might have a stronger relevance to large demonstration and deployment projects, but overall, these can be good things to consider at the start of any process and the beginning of thinking about what role community engagement can play in what you're thinking about doing. Ultimately, it's all about building trust with different stakeholders and strengthening those relationships and finding ways to maximize all the different benefits that a project or the growth of a company can bring for not just the people directly participating in that project, but the larger community. And finding ways to maximize those benefits as opposed to facing any challenges around community opposition. In the spirit of creating authentic dialogue, it's important to make sure that we don't fall back on what you could think of as business as usual communications practices, in which information typically tends to flow in one direction from the project developer to the community. That often leaves the question of how will we be able to have a say in this unaddressed. So the things in the column on the left are certainly good to do in general, and I think for most companies, part of standard business practices, and that's certainly a good thing. The things in the column on the right are where the engagement piece really happens, and also public presentations and open houses are really great to do too. They can be even better when they're accompanied by opportunities to hear from the folks from your community who are attending those events. I also wanted to include this graphic, which is called the Spectrum of Public Participation. It was created by the International Association for Public Participation, and it provides a really helpful breakdown of what meaningful stakeholder engagement can look like. You have one-way communication all the way on the left, and then all the way over on the right, that's the, where you're really getting to the place where members of the public have a significant say in any final decisions. Getting all the way over to that right-hand column certainly may not be possible in every situation or for every project, and that's fine and I think to be expected. But this is a way of starting to reorient our thinking around what the possibilities can be in terms of how we engage others. For thinking about what a general process could look like for stakeholder engagement, I've sketched out some basic steps here on this slide. It can always be good to start by taking a clear-eyed look at what social or environmental disparities exist among your stakeholders and also between them and your organization. What are the issues that the community might feel concerned about, or like what things might they especially want to participate in? What you wind up learning from stakeholders, what their views are on these subjects may be different from what your initial impressions or guesses may be, but it's definitely good to have this as a starting point to build on. Next step is to start structuring processes and opportunities for meaningful engagement to take place along the lines of the examples that we saw on the previous slides. And then using those listening sessions, those one-on-one meetings, and open houses to learn about what the community actually wants, what are their concerns and what are their hopes for working with you. From there, you can start the process of evaluating what impacts and benefits your work is going to have on the community, and thinking about what the best opportunities are going to be to collaborate, maybe to course correct in some way if that's needed, and to increase the trade-offs between impacts and benefits. Maybe new partnerships or training programs can be created that can benefit both your company or your organization and folks in the community. This is all about thinking about the different ways that you can increase the size of the pie rather than cutting it into different sized or smaller pieces. And step 6 is about making it happen, actually putting in place the results of your engagement and creating ways to involve the community, ideally as directly as possible, and in making that happen and maintaining that involvement over time. Now I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about DOE's participation in the Justice 40 initiative. So figuring out how we simultaneously transform our energy system while ensuring that it becomes more equitable and just has been the underlying theme of all the slides that we've covered up to this point. I want to spend a little more time specifically talking about the concepts of environmental justice and energy justice. The environmental justice movement, as you may be familiar with, grew out of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. It has a long and robust history focused mainly on conventional environmental pollution and the corresponding harms that can bring to people's health and livelihood. Energy justice is similar, and it's fundamentally about ensuring that the benefits and burdens of the energy system are equally distributed. Energy justice refers to the goal of achieving equity in both the social and economic participation in the energy system, while also remediating social, economic, and health burdens on marginalized communities. Energy justice explicitly centers the outcomes and concerns for frontline communities, which have borne the brunt of adverse environmental impacts in the United States, and aims to make energy more accessible, affordable, clean, and democratically managed for all communities. Justice 40 was established in Executive Order 14008, which is called Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad. It's a historic initiative in which each federal agency takes part, and it's very foundational and significant in the way that it pairs the huge ambition of a nationwide transition to clean energy with strong equity outcomes. Energy justice forms a cornerstone of the Biden administration and requires that we recalibrate our energy system to ensure that the benefits and burdens of the new system are more equitably spread across all communities, all across the United States. And recalibrating our energy system in this way requires a transformative commitment to targeting disadvantaged communities for clean energy investments, new jobs, and businesses. That's what the Justice 40 initiative has been designed and created to do. And through J40, President Biden made a commitment to communities across the country to promise that 40% of benefits from certain federal investments, including clean energy investments, flow to disadvantaged communities. We're very proud to say that Justice 40 covers all FECM programs. We determined this based on guidance on the executive order from the Office of Management and Budget, and Justice 40 covers, a wide range of climate change, clean energy, and energy efficiency projects, all of which fall under the rubric of Justice 40 for FECM. In terms of specific DOE Justice 40 policy priorities, as you can see here, they're all listed. They focus on decreasing energy burden and decreasing environmental exposure for disadvantaged communities, or DACs. Also increasing parity in clean energy technology access, increasing access to low-cost capital for businesses in disadvantaged communities, increasing the creation of new business enterprises, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, disadvantaged businesses, and DACs. Increasing the clean energy job pipeline, certainly, and also increasing energy resiliency and energy democracy in disadvantaged communities. This slide contains a lot of information, and I wanted to include it mainly for your reference since you all have access to these slides. This slide provides more detailed information on how DOE developed its definition of a disadvantaged community. The definition was developed through extensive internal and external research and collaboration. And it's based on data for 36 indicators that are collected at the census tract level. These 36 indicators fall into 4 main categories that you see here. And if you'd like to learn more about the DAC definition, I encourage you to check out DOE's Justice 40 website, which has that information and a lot more. Lastly, I'm going to spend some time talking about quality jobs as part of the SCI framework. If you've had the chance to hear Secretary Granholm speak at any of her public events, chances are very good that you've heard her talk with enthusiasm about the importance of creating quality jobs. And making sure that Americans have good jobs is something that has been central to her work ever since the time when she was governor of Michigan. It's definitely a major part of her mission at DOE, and it's something that the whole agency stands behind her firmly on. We're expecting a significant amount of job creation to take place through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or the bill. And we're focusing on making sure that these jobs are good jobs in a more robust way than DOE has ever approached this type of work in the past. Because of the large amounts of construction work that build programs are going to require, and also because so many build programs are focused on strengthening United States manufacturing, what we're expecting is that the majority of jobs created under through DOE projects under bill in the coming years are going to be jobs that will be widely accessible to people without a college degree. And we see these jobs as a tremendous opportunity for workers who are entering these sectors, as well as for workers who are already in these fields and want to grow their skills to have access to good training, and in many cases, a combination of on-the-job learning and targeted classroom instruction. Registered apprenticeships, which you may be familiar with, are the main example of this type of workforce training, where workers earn a starting wage while receiving their training, which results in a nationally recognized professional credential. We also want to do as much as we can to support job creation for disadvantaged and underrepresented workers, who are also often workers of color, to create the workforce that looks like all of America that I talked about earlier in the presentation. We're doing all these things by incorporating labor standards into our funding opportunities. And we're asking applicants to think about certain things that we would love for them to share with us, like what kinds of health and safety standards will you be having at your job sites to make sure that workers can do their job safely. Also, will predictable work schedules be provided to workers so that people can take care of their lives outside of work as well as do their jobs. And also if there will be clear processes for dispute resolution so that when issues arise, they can be worked through in a fair and impartial way. We're also asking applicants to think about what kind of workforce training they'll be able to provide and who they may be partnering with to do that. And what efforts they can make to recruit marginally and historically underrepresented workers into those jobs. Also, and importantly, we're interested in hearing what employers are thinking about in terms of what they'll be able to do to provide good wages and benefits for their workers and offer them a free and fair choice to join a union. All of these things are important for attracting and retaining a skilled and trained workforce. We want to do everything we can to make sure that when public dollars are spent, that good jobs are being created with that money. We could spend a lot of time going into what makes a good job in greater detail, but I wanted to provide this graphic from a study about women's participation in manufacturing jobs. And it shows the pay disparity that women experience in multiple sectors. But you can see the red dot sort of towards the lower middle and the left. Women typically earn about 75% of what men earn in the manufacturing sector. You know, similar to what you see on this slide, there are significant racial pay gaps, pay equity gaps that exist as well. These are, you know, exactly the kinds of disparities that we're looking to address in how DOE projects happen going forward. So that's a pretty close look at what we're doing at DOE, within DOE, to support job creation and job quality. I wanted to zoom out a bit to share some of the many other things that the White House and other agencies are doing to support good jobs, especially in the manufacturing sector. There's a lot happening across the federal landscape in this department. With the passage of the Build America, Buy America Act, there will be domestic content requirements on all of DOE projects, and the administration is also working on additional processes by which US-made goods can be preferenced in public purchasing. Some of you may have heard about the Department of Labor's Good Jobs Initiative, which focuses on how DOL will be supporting other agencies and making sure that we're utilizing the full range of tools that we have available to make sure that good jobs are being created through build programs. Some of you may have heard also about the Davis-Bacon prevailing wage requirements that are going to apply to all construction work on DOE's build programs, including fossil energy and carbon management programs. And for 5 specific energy technologies, the White House has authorized DOE to use the Defense Production Act to support the domestic manufacturing of solar photovoltaics, transformers, and other hardware for the electric grid, heat pumps, insulation, and electrolyzers, and also platinum group metals for hydrogen production. So to wrap it up, we're very excited about your interest in the Carbon Conversion Procurement Grant Program. Please know how much I appreciate you taking the time to consider SCI ideas, the ones that I've shared with you today, and also any other ones that you may be thinking about in connection to what's been talked about in these slides. As you continue to engage with the program team, I hope that you'll keep considering these ideas in the context of your own projects. Our goal with creating the SCI framework is to enlarge the range of positive outcomes that can benefit everyone involved. I want to recap some of them here: increasing productivity, creativity, retention, and buy-in among your team members, building pipelines for more workers, which is something that we all benefit from, increasing opportunities for small, women-owned and minority-owned businesses, building a more diverse STEM community, and creating more resilient economies locally and regionally as a result of all of these things put together. And I'm sure that you can think of a lot of other ways in which SCI concepts can benefit, project teams as well. That's everything I wanted to cover. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm not sure, Alex, if we have time for questions now.
Yeah, if anyone in the room has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself with the speaker. Not seeing any in the room and not seeing any online. Thank you so much, Christie. Our next speaker is Dr. Joe Stofa from the National Energy Technology Laboratory.
So hi, everybody. Hopefully I'm coming through okay. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Alex. Happy to talk to everybody today. So I'm going to give a general overview of the carbon conversion program and also provide some wider thoughts. And this is the first of these meetings, so please do provide feedback that we'll use to refine this presentation going forward to ensure it's as responsive to the audience as it can be. If there are specific questions, please ask at the end so we can tailor the presentations going forward. So I just wanted to cover the National Energy Technology Laboratory quickly. So we're one of 17 U.S. Department of Energy national laboratories. NETL is different in that NETL is the only government-owned, government-operated national lab. So there are 3 major labs spread across Pittsburgh, Morgantown, and Albany, about half federal employees, half contractor employees. And since we're government operated, there are a lot of inherently federal functions that occur at NETL. So those include finance and acquisition type activities, project management activities, and technology management activities, which is my role as technology manager for the carbon conversion program. So basically, as technology manager, it's trying to set program direction in collaboration with Amishi and the rest of DOE headquarters, and trying to implement that through different funding opportunities and other processes. So NETL is specifically focused on trying to be the nation's premier energy technology laboratory. So delivering integrated solutions to enable transformation to a sustainable energy future. So NETL is the energy lab is the main takeaway message. And I wanted to cover some mission goals and drivers of the carbon conversion program. So again, carbon conversion is under the umbrella of carbon management. And the goal is to try to minimize the climate and environmental impacts of fossil energy through CO2 conversion. And also, as Amishi alluded to, also outside of fossil energy. So it's not specifically tied to fossil energy as far as a CO2 source. We want to support R&D that can convert CO2 into products. So we'll cover a little bit more about the variety of products and technologies that fall within that portfolio. You know, what's the driver for this? It's the amount of CO2 emissions. So 2020 for the United States was approximately 4.7 gigatons, and total global was over 36 gigatons for 2021. So that's you know, hard to envision amount of CO2. So I think the scale of the problem is has a quality all its own. And that's listed there in the challenges, scale CO2 emissions relative to consumption. So if you look at current markets for carbon dioxide relative to the emissions, you'll find that the annual demand for CO2 can be covered by about 1 day's worth of CO2 emissions. So 1 out of the 365 days. So we obviously need to you know, move that equation. That'll happen through the carbon conversion program, through increasing the demand for CO2 for products. It'll happen through capture by capturing some of the CO2 that will be emitted. It'll be handled by other offices within DOE that are looking at decreasing the source side of the source sink relationship. So through, you know, increased penetration of renewables and energy storage. So that's kind of the pathway there. Some of the other challenges we have, we'll discuss in more detail later, is qualifying and quantifying economic viability and environmental impacts. So when we put the funding opportunity announcements out, we receive applications, we evaluate them. They're relatively easy to evaluate for technical merit, but trying to evaluate what's the economic impact or life cycle impact, that's a more difficult problem. We also have the problem of electricity prices rarely being negative or free. That's changing a little bit more with increased penetration of renewables, and even on the East Coast, there's a lot of you know, potential for low-cost off-peak electricity at night from some nuke plants that kind of have to stay running. So those are some challenges, and then we have our Yogi Berra quote. It's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So we'll cover that in a little bit more details later on what we're trying to do there with TEA and Lca. So the carbon conversion program has 3 main pathways. So we think of these as the 3 legs of the stool. We support R&D in biological uptake. This is usually through algae for production of bioproducts. We support R&D and catalytic conversion, so taking CO2, adding energy in the form of heat, hydrogen, electricity to convert to fuels and chemicals. And then we also have mineralization, which is using CO2 and usually some carbonate reaction. I specifically want to mention that working fluids are outside the scope of the program. So CO2 as a means of enhanced oil recovery, or CO2 as a fluid for supercritical power cycles, that's outside the scope of the carbon conversion program. And as Mishi mentioned, budgets have been increasing. I took over as technology manager in FY20, so I'm definitely not taking credit for that. That's far above my pay grade, but yeah, the budget's been increasing, and I always point out that I'm technology manager at NETL for 3 technology areas, and the amount of interest I've received in carbon conversion over the past year has surpassed everything else. By far, that wasn't the case when I first started in 2019. I'll briefly cover the carbon conversion program within NETL. So I had mentioned that NETL is government-owned, government-operated, but we also have in-house research. So this is what you'd think of as more of a traditional national lab function, where there's research occurring at NETL into carbon conversion. This is an overall relatively smaller proportion of the portfolio and funding, but very important because we can do, specific work there that can be extra responsive to our needs and a little bit unique and the stuff that needs to be tightly coupled to the program. So the traditional R&D in the lab is majorly focused on conversion into chemicals. So there's a lot of activity in catalyst design, microwave reformation, reactive capture, and a few other areas. We have a ESAT group that works on life cycle analysis, and this team is absolutely world class. And it's vital to determining environmental impact. But the challenges are, where do you draw your box around the process for the life cycle analysis? How much do you cause that to vary across region? There's just so many questions and nuances there that we won't have time to go into completely, but just want to highlight that life cycle analysis is vital. Anything we support, we have to be confident that it's going to have a significant positive impact on carbon emissions. And really the only way we can do that is through the life cycle analysis. And we also have Greg here, who leads up the techno-economic analysis through the energy process analysis team. We know that all successful technologies must add value. It's not just enough to emit less CO2, right? At the end of the day, it's going to have to cost less. Whether that lower cost comes through just being a better process, or in the form of credits, swinging the process in favor of using CO2. We know that it has to add value. The big problem we'll discuss a little later with the TEA is that it's dependent upon many unknowns, and that's kind of referencing that Yogi Berra quote. I'll also cover carbon conversion through NETL. So the majority of program dollars goes towards extramural research that occurs outside of NETL. So this is supporting R&D through various funding mechanisms. We have the fieldwork proposals with other national laboratories. We have the funding opportunity announcements. This is the majority of funding. It's competitively awarded. There are SBIR and STTR grant programs. So small business innovative research and technology transfer and research, which is basically in collaboration, the STTR with a university component. And then we have several other mechanisms, but those tend to be smaller portions of the overall funding pie. We have over 36 active projects now, and we'll be adding more due to a few recent FOAs. And these are all in the areas of mineralization, conversion, and biological uptake. Amici is going to cover BIL in much more detail. I just wanted to use this single piece of the BIL text to kind of kick off the next part of the discussion, which is that an eligible entity shall use a grant received under this paragraph to procure and use. And so I have procure and use highlighted there, carbon conversion products. So the next series of slides will talk about some of the carbon conversion pathways and products that are supported within the program. So carbon conversion by biological uptake, this is kind of a rough overview of what we have in the portfolio. A range of products are possible. So there's work on animal and fish feed, algae to nutraceuticals, dyes and colorants, algae as a basis for polymers, soil amendments, such as fertilizers. And I wanted to mention that within the FECM carbon conversion program, that fuels from algae is specific to the mission of DOE EERE's BETO, the Bioenergy Technologies Office. So we don't fund work in algae to fuels for R&D, for support of research and development. And just as a general overview of the biological uptake, I wanted to cover some of the advantages and challenges of these processes. The big advantages I see it is 10,000 years plus of human agricultural experience. So the intellectual capital and money that's gone into understanding agriculture and these bioreactions is huge and something that can be leveraged. It's also a big positive that this is mostly enabled with what I think of as catalog engineering, a lot of commercial off-the-shelf equipment in these algae processes. The biological processes are also well suited to creating a variety of complex carbon molecules. So that's an advantage. The challenge is the large area required to achieve gigaton scale. So if you look at annual carbon uptake in the entire environment around Earth, certainly that's gigaton scale. So gigaton is possible, but it's kinetically slower to have a photosynthesis reaction than it is a stainless steel reactor vessel that's at 500 C and hundreds of PSI. The variables that the manufacturers often consider when researching some of these biological processes is what's the source of the CO2. So you have to locate, if it's a biological process, you have to locate the conversion process, co-locate it with the source. So what is that source? What's the concentration of the CO2? What's the temperature and pressure? Does that fit what you need? Are there any contaminants within the CO2 stream? Obviously, with biological processes, contaminants can be an issue, especially if you're thinking of using the product as a feed or a soil amendment. So that's an issue. What type of inputs are required? So you're going to be somewhere where you need heat, potentially nutrients, and likely photons. If you're at a industrial type facility or a power facility, there's going to be a lot of waste heat available typically. And depending on where you're located and time of year, you should have sufficient photons. And then you also, think about the customer and their requirements, price, quantity, quality, availability. So kind of typical things that you would be concerned of as a manufacturer who's trying to sell the product. The different processes you'll see associated with biological uptake, you'll see open raceway ponds. They look kind of just like, elongated swimming pools that are usually a foot to 2 feet deep that are kind of being stirred. You'll see photobioreactors, which would be turning electricity into photons to feed the photosynthesis reaction. And you also see some columnar type reaction vessels. So those are some of the processes you'll see, and those will be co-located with the industrial utility or direct air capture or whatever the source is. Some support we've had recently for biological uptake. DOE FOA 2654, carbon utilization technology, improving efficient systems for algae. This was issued by EERE Vieder, but there was a topic area that was funded by FECM. And that was algae-based technology to utilize anthropogenic CO2 from utility and industrial sources. We had stated up to 5 awards at $2 million each. That FOA is closed. Selections have not been announced yet, so no further information there other than to say that was a recent FOA that's closed. Last year, we had FOA 2403, which was engineering scale testing and validation of algae-based technologies and bioproducts. We had 4 selections at $2 million each. And the goal there was basically to support R&D that could be scaled up to the approximately 1,000 liters volume. So that's some recent support within the program. So there's a pretty extensive section on NETL's website that will list all of the projects that have been publicly announced. So you can go there to see, who the players are, where they're located, what they're doing, and, could potentially help with some matchmaking efforts in the future. Wanted to briefly cover carbon conversion by thermo and electrochemistry. So the big advantage here is the widest range of products are possible. We're supporting a lot of R&D for converting CO2 into fuels, into polymers, even solid carbons. The big advantage here is we certainly have pathways to the gigaton scale. When you're dealing with this type of chemistry, almost any molecule you can envision can be synthesized, including those currently derived from fossil fuel. The big challenges are that you have to ensure the value of products outweigh the cost of the energy inputs. So if you're going through this sort of conversion process, you're adding energy to CO2, either in the form of electricity, hydrogen, or heat. So ensuring that the product outweighs the cost of the energy input. And a lot of the breakthroughs could require other breakthroughs, whether that's electrochemistry, electrochemical devices, or catalyst development. So it's a little bit less of that catalog engineering that I had referenced in some of the other processes. The variables manufacturers often consider, they'll have to consider what is the source of the CO2. Again, we always have to worry about contaminants, temperature, pressure. The inputs are a big deal with the thermo and electrochemical conversions, specifically electricity and hydrogen, customer location requirements. When we think about the processes, we'll support R&D that's converting CO2 electrochemically. So that's leveraging a lot of work that's been performed under EERE in development of PEM fuel cells, using those in reverse for a lot of these electrochemical processes. We also support R&D into thermochemical reactors and microwave and plasma reactors. This is the largest product account within the portfolio. It's the majority of the active projects. We focus on the entire value spectrum from high volume through high value. So obviously we want to reach a scale where we can significantly impact the carbon problem. Sorry about that. I think I'm online now. That's why you shouldn't put your hand in your pocket and fiddle with the receiver. That's conversion. And I'll go ahead and move on to conversion via mineralization. This is some of the highest TRL R&D we support within the program. So, this could be cured concrete, synthetic aggregates, suboxides, building materials. The big advantage here is that mineralization can be energetically downhill. The only thing that's, kind of downhill of CO2 is a rock energetically. So mineralization is good from that perspective. It can obviously apply at the gigaton scale. We know how to mine gigatons of material, minerals. So that's great. Again, this one I see as being mostly enabled with catalog type engineering. It also has some ability to address other waste streams. So you can think of produced water or mine tailings being potential sources of minerals for mineralization reactions. So maybe you can get a little bit of a win-win there. The big challenge here, I think, is that a lot of the products often have a low specific value. So if you think of the dollar per ton of something like a polycarbonate polymer from the previous example versus a ton of concrete, obviously the concrete's worth less in terms of dollars per ton. So transportation costs become a significant proportion of your product cost. So there's a little bit more attention to be paid to co-location. And then inputs and sources similar to the other processes. I guess the inputs are a little bit different in that you have to think of raw minerals and potential electricity and heat. Some recent support here is we had the FOA 2614 for carbon management. So this one just recently closed on July 22nd. This is a multi-program, multi-year FOA, so keep this one in mind. When Amishi was wearing her hat for Mark as director of all of carbon management, this FOA covers that. So it includes areas of interest on carbon conversion, CDR, point source, carbon capture technology, and carbon storage. The area of interest that was specific to carbon conversion was AOI 1A, lab scale testing of mineralization systems to generate commercial products. We recently started supporting some work in reactive capture and conversion. So this is kind of a hybrid between capture and conversion, and as such, these projects are jointly funded by both programs. So when you have a capture process, you're usually adsorbing or absorbing into some solvent or sorbent. Then you go through a regeneration step to release the CO2. In the reactive capture case, you're taking that loaded solvent or sorbent and directly converting it to a product. The big advantage is you avoid the energy intensive regeneration step. The disadvantage is that whatever solvent or sorbent you're using has to be inexpensive enough to make it worthwhile when it's incorporated into the final product. So we had a lab call and selected 5 national labs, and they're listed up there. So these are the 5 labs that are looking at reactive capture and conversion. National NAT projects, I'll have to change that. A little typo there. Okay, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about is the necessity of TEA and LCA for an uncertain future. This gets to the point about we're aiming at a moving target, and we have to know the R&D we're supporting today. It's not, is it going to be competitive today? It's, is it going to be competitive when it's ready for commercialization? So when we think about the energy future, there's kind of 3 broad visions. There's the tomorrow will look a lot like today vision. So this is kind of, maybe best exemplified by some of the EIA predictions where, there's this mix of fossil, renewable, and nuclear resources. There's abundant waste heat. Industrial electricity prices stay around $60 to $80 per megawatt hour. If you believe in the DOE vision as I do of, potential for inexpensive and abundant hydrogen in the future, that's another potential energy or potential future scenario. The goal is $1 per kilogram within 1 decade for hydrogen. If that comes to fruition, then obviously the thermochemical and electrochemical conversion processes start to look a lot better. We have wide decarbonization of industry at that point, as hydrogen, could be your least expensive form of heat compared to conventional fossil. So for steel production, cement, and fertilizer production, that could have very large implications. Then the third worldview is what I refer to as the techno-cornucopian worldview. I think of that one as being best characterized by people like Tony Seba, who, look at the cost curves and say, if these trends continue, then within a decade, we have electricity that's $20 to $30 per megawatt hour. Everything's electrified. Obviously, that's favorable for the electrochemical applications. And then we have all of the other unknowns that we have to worry about. So we have carbon prices and credits. What is the cost of direct air capture? That has an effect on conversion, because if direct air capture gets inexpensive enough, then maybe you choose to store rather than convert. What are other energy breakthroughs? Is somebody going to create a battery that doesn't require any critical minerals, that is $10 per kilowatt hour, and that could change the equation. Then other unknowns. I know we have a lot of people who are heads of their own businesses here, and I just think about the recent rise we've seen in interest rates. So is that an unknown? Do people stop wanting to invest when that happens? So there's many unknowns in the future. And I guess the larger point is, when we think about techno-economic analysis, we need to think about more of a surface than a one single number. So it's not the economics of this process is this number. It's the economics of this process depend on electricity price this much, on hydrogen price this much, on all of these other factors. So it's like a response surface more than a number. So yeah, just to summarize some of the high profile items, we're supporting R&D in new and exciting areas, the reactive capture and conversion. We're collaborating with multiple stakeholders, mostly Mishi through the HQ side, with both government and non-governmental. Programs expanding quickly. So if you look at the funding combined with annual appropriations plus BIL funding, it's growing very quickly. So scaling is the thing that's probably most concerning, is just growing that quickly. That's difficult. It's a good problem to have, but it is a problem. And with that out of the way, be happy to take any questions, assuming I hopefully left enough time for some. And yeah, check out the NETL website on carbon utilization, and feel free to reach out to myself or Amishi.
Thank you so much, Joe.
All right, so the first part of the products are they need to be used or derived from anthropogenic carbon oxides. This is the first deviation from what we've typically done in the program. As mentioned before, we've done carbon dioxide R&D. Now we're looking at carbon oxides. This is an expansive view. We are now looking at products that can be made from, say, carbon monoxide, steel off-gassing. And that opens up to more technologies, more potential products even. So that's a very informative and new direction that this program or this grant opportunity can take. Second, Congress said the products must demonstrate significant net reductions in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to incumbent technologies, processes, and products. This is really helpful for how the program, the R&D program, has looked at life cycle analysis. Matt will go deeper into life cycle analysis, but we realize that utilization conversion technologies take energy, they take money. It's very hard to take, CO2, the Monday of molecules, and turn it into something valuable. So when we look at, carbon oxide based products, what we're saying the threshold for it counting in terms of a life cycle isn't like net negative or these really ambitious goals. We're looking for improvement compared to how products are made today. That's a lot more achievable. And how we measure a significant net reduction, we'll talk in greater detail, and Matt will talk about our LCA tools that will be used to help validate that statement. So I think that goalpost that Congress said with compared to incumbent technologies is a really achievable goalpost, and makes this program a lot more successful, or will be a lot more successful in execution. Critical points. They broke out our $310 million over 5 years. Last year, or I guess this year, fiscal years are different in government. For FY22, we got 41 million, and then starting in FY23, we're going to go up from 65 million incrementally year after year. One point that I'd like to draw is that this funding goes to the program. That's really different. Every other section, 40302 or 301, all of those go towards a specific initiative, right? So it's like the DAC hubs, all of the money that we gave you in IIJA or bill will go towards the development of a DAC hub or a hydrogen hub or a feed study or a demonstration. This is the one program that I'm familiar with that gives the money to the R&D entity. So this money goes to the discretion of the program. From this additional money that we're getting over the course of these 5 years, we can allocate how much money will be spent on the procurement grants. We envision that this program will be dynamic, the procurement grants will be dynamic. Hopefully, we'll be getting more applications and more products and more grants out there as time goes on. We also know there will be a cap. We can't spend more than 310 million. So that would be the cap. We're envisioning a relatively steady amount that we're allocating with increases if we're able to get more and more folks into this grant program. These procurement grants, obviously, as stated, will go to the eligible entities. Hopefully, some of you are in the room or you will engage folks that will be eligible entities. And as mentioned, this money will need to go towards products that have a net reduction in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. I would stop here for questions if there's any. All right, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, later in the conversation. Something to highlight, life cycle analysis. We will have Matt. I really love the fact that I can just be like, and this slide will be covered by someone else. But Matt will really go into details about this, and it's great. We initially created this toolkit for that R&D program that's been around, that's grown 10 to 12, 21, et cetera, up to 50 million. This toolkit was originally designed for that. So while if you go read the methodology, you'll see that it's it's prescriptive to a degree, and it's really written for a PI to use it. We like it a lot. We felt like there was a strong need to understand our life cycle analysis. We have so many different types of technologies that are in the R&D portfolio that assessing them across mineralization to catalytic conversion was really hard. And if we relied on existing methodology like ISO, you could get vastly different life cycle analysis results at the end of one. So we created this methodology. NETL did a wonderful job. But again, since the original toolkit, this original guidance was geared towards PIs, it's not helpful for a lot of different use cases. One of those use cases that have started to emerge is 45Q. So if you look at this blue dot that's on the right side, that's all lit up, that says a 45Q addendum. How this works is you'll have your methodology, your initial guidance. It's a living document. We've already created another version of it. The second version is better suited to understanding CO2 uses beyond coal, right? You can use industrial sources. You can use natural gas, potentially even DAC. So it's constantly getting improved. So you have this guidance that is in the R&D space, it's living. When you have an addendum, you realize that, this methodology can be used by people, say, for a tax credit like 45Q. The addendum is a read along to that guidance. So you can actually take sections of, this guidance and you're like, this doesn't pertain to you. You're not an R&D person, you're a tax applicant. So you would read the guidance and, maybe add in a couple steps if you're a commercial tax applicant, or if you're at a commercial scale. Or you could replace things, or certain rules might not apply to you, or a certain set of new rules would apply to you. But either way, they kind of work in conjunction or in cooperation. And I think it's a really great way to build off of this initial toolkit and just create a variety of uses from this living document. We envision for the procurement grants, we will have another addendum. So it'll be another read-along document that goes along with the original methodology that we created for the R&D program. Hopefully that's complicated, but understandable. I think it's great. Once you start getting used to it, it takes some time. There's a lot of things in toolkit, but it's probably one of the most user-friendly ways to do LCA. There's even training resources in that upper right. There's videos. I highly recommend it. And if you want the money, you'll have to get used to it, I guess. So this is the LCA process that we're envisioning, right? So LCA was a requirement that you had to hit if you're going to get a procurement grant. So we're envisioning a product manufacturer. We engaged a lot of product manufacturers into virtual sessions. We've had a lot of product manufacturer engagement through the R&D program. So what the CO2 based or COX based product manufacturer, has created their product. They will then need to complete this LCA for their product that they're hoping to get approved. And they will submit this LCA according to the guidelines and methodologies that we publish. DOE will then review the manufacturer's LCA. We understand LCA is a very complex tool. It will always be refined. What we are looking for is a way to uniformly compare our applications. We want to create conformity to the guidelines. We are also establishing that there's a 10% threshold for significant net reduction. So will be at least a minimum improvement over business as usual of at least 10%. That will likely be a dynamic goalpost, like in a lot of buy clean programs. They start at a certain percentage and they increase how much you need to be improving year after year. So once we establish that, you've followed the rules and you have submitted, a viable LCA and you have established it's 10%, you will get the stamp. So you're at this third step. You're approved, you're qualified, whatever term you want to use, and the manufacturer will be added to the list as a CO2 or as a carbon derived product manufacturer. A lot of your heavy lifting will be done. Now you need to partner with eligible entities, or eligible entities will partner with you to purchase, to procure and use your product, right? That agreement will then be submitted. My purchase agreement will be submitted to DOE and the eligible entities would, get their rebate. This is a demonstration program. It's under the demonstration section of bill. So by definition, demonstration programs, legal counsel tells us, can only be up to 50% cost share from DOE. So there will be also another cap to how much money eligible entities can receive in terms of their procurement grant. I mentioned we did, one of our more conventional ways of community engagement. We did this RFI, or request for information. I'm going to put these slides on here more for your use. We've shared these broadly, and these are the summary points that came from our RFI. This was distilled down from, over the 50 applicants or 50 responses we received. I also want to draw actually some attention to what we would deem as eligible entities, like state and local governments. There was like one response. We need more engagement from the folks that will actually be applying for these programs, which is why we're trying to do this regional approach. There was success in other programs like Carbon Safe and the storage programs. We understand there's a regional complexity when we look at the nation broadly. So diving in, understanding who's really vested in obtaining these technologies, where we need to put some more emphasis on, is really important. So that kind of dialogue is helpful for us as well. What we've engaged with very well is industry. We've had those relationships. They're very vocal to us, and we understand their perspectives. And a lot of those perspectives are reflected here. A lot of the industry in particular can speak to like the high premiums associated with creating these products. They can speak to the business case being really difficult when you're creating a brand new novel product. And they can speak to how hard it is to validate whether or not this product is beneficial, right? The products code standards, certifications, this was a constant thing that people hit on. It was hard for folks to certify their carbon dioxide based product was valid, or that it could sufficiently, be detailed with the methodology to prove that it was a carbon conversion product or could qualify for some low carbon certification. So we are trying to address things like that. We understand that for procurement, there might be other standards. Those eligible entities may not look at LCAs, so that kind of dialogue is also helpful. But overall, I think this program is very helpful for addressing so many of these issues, in particular the business case. We have at DOE, at FECM, we've looked at creating a technology push. We've looked at creating a suite of technologies. This is now helping validate that market goal. We're helping folks actually obtain products they want, that there's a market space for, and we're trying to create that and trying to compensate in some manner that high cost premium that's associated with a set of targeted products. Additional resources. Alex actually teed up this already. This is the Carbon Management Applicant Workshop, that first link. It's about 4 hours long and it's got a lot of information, but it's really helpful. It talks about BOAs, it talks about how to apply to DOE. If you go to the very end, about hour 3, minute 50, you'll hear us talk. But that goes to show you there's a lot going on with FECM. We have billions of dollars going out from the program, and understanding our perspectives from the R&D program, understanding what our procurement standards are, understanding what SCI is. These are all components of each one of these new initiatives, especially coming out of BIL or IIJA. As mentioned, the LCA toolkit will get a deeper dive soon. And these are the leads. And yeah, we're excited for questions. I don't know what the time is, but I think maybe it's worth going into discussion.
We'll go into some questions and then
Oh, yeah.
So we actually do have a couple of questions that came in online. First one, do you mind just going back a couple of slides to show that RFI number?
Yeah, for sure.
Or do you have like the full number, the DE dash, like the official number of the RFI?
Oh, I don't, but
That's not in the slides. Okay.
yeah, but we can provide
we
that.
can
I
provide
can
that.
make a slide pick with the RFI number.
Okay, perfect. And then we have another question that if you don't mind, I'm going to take a stab at answering it. And then if you can kind of fill in. The question was, are businesses not eligible entities for funding in this program? And that is correct. Eligible entities are state and local governments as well as public utilities. And so if you are a business or a member of industry and you're like, well, what the heck? Well, if I'm not eligible for this, why am I even here? Eligible entities can purchase your product using this funding. So if the city of Knoxville has decided to procure low carbon fuels, then they could purchase those fuels from you as the producer of the fuel with the help of these procurement grants. So if you are a member of industry and worried, about not being eligible for this program, you can still kind of use this as part of your sales pitch and your business development efforts. If you're focused on working with state and local governments or public utilities, knowledge of this program can certainly help you in your endeavors. And feel free to build off that or tell me I'm completely wrong.
No, Alex, I'm going to give you the mic next time. I can do this. No, that's spot on. And that point of what defines eligible entities, people have flagged, they want more description, they want more details. So when the actual FOA comes out, we will be sure to add more details about what an eligible entity actually is. And also when a FOA comes out, there's a period of time where while it's active, you can also ask questions, and those questions are posted. So there will be opportunities to get some more clarifications once it's active. But very good questions, and yes, that's
So for the LCA and the toolkit that you provide, is that something that we can go on and form an LCA or recommend or conducted by a third party? So it's not biased or whatever, but as long as, or is it something that will conduct that?
Really good question. So it was created so like a PI, in-house could do their LCA in a really objectively unbiased manner. In certain applications, like say for 45Q, IRS actually called out like you needed to do this third-party verification or critical review within NETL when you submit. So for some applications of LCA, that external appraisal is there. But I would offer up, if you have the capacity to build LCA understanding within your own organization, it's a really good thing to invest in, especially given the fact that a lot of the decarbonization technologies, push-ins, grant, solicitation will require an LCA. And it's created to help facilitate, the execution in your organization. It's very user-friendly as far as LCA tools go.
Use it for internal purposes, scoping purposes, and if need be, there'd be a third party there go out for that.
Yeah, depending on what the app might be. But it's IRS using it for. Are there any other questions online?
There are not. So with that, thank you so much, Amishi.
Yeah, as I mentioned, my name is Matt Jameson at the National Energy Technology Laboratory. I've been there at the lab for 10 years doing environmental life cycle analysis of kind of complex energy systems, starting with power plant modeling, coal mining, the kind of full gamut. I want to start off with this slide again. I think this might be the last time we see this today. I'm not sure, but to highlight why we care about life cycle analysis for this crowd in particular, and really highlighting the fact that one of the mandates here is that the technology needs to demonstrate significant net reductions in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to incumbent technologies, processes, and products. Which is important because just because you're using CO2, presumably in most cases, or other carbon oxides, doesn't guarantee that you're going to end up with an environmentally beneficial product. In many cases, these systems will still be carbon positive. That is, they will still result in more CO2 in the atmosphere in the end, particularly for like fossil kind of based carbon. Even the captured power plant, there's going to be some CO2 that's not captured that will be emitted. And then additionally, and Amishi touched on this a little bit earlier, but using CO2 usually takes more energy than conventionally sourced products, and this is where kind of LCA steps in to help capture potential environmental benefits. If the carbon utilization product life cycle is less greenhouse gas intensive than existing products, and that carbon utilization product can prevent any of the conventionally sourced products from being produced, then there could be fewer GHG emissions to the atmosphere. And get to kind of the last picture here, the carbon reducing state, where you have kind of competing products and your product is better environmentally. Also meant to touch on, I mentioned mostly being carbon positive. If there's the use of biomass in your system, or if you're using CO2 from DAC, actually pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, then you can start looking at carbon dioxide removal or net carbon negative or carbon neutral systems. A little bit more on LCA. So what is life cycle assessment? LCA is a technique that helps people to make better decisions to protect the environment by accounting for the potential impacts from raw material acquisition through production, use, end of life treatment, this is recycling, final disposal, otherwise known as cradle to grave. The general goal of an LCA is to account for kind of all resources used, all emissions to the environment throughout the product, end up with a final answer. How do you compare to other LCAs of similar products? While the goal is to capture everything, That's generally not been the case. You can have a specific LCA study goal to look at, in this case, only greenhouse gas emissions, which will kind of simplify creating your inventory, your model, and yeah, means less work. The DOE uses LCA for a number of purposes. One is to establish national baselines, similar to the techno-economics analysis. You know, once you start getting these novel technologies, you want to be able to compare to something. And our kind of bigger national baselines have been petroleum, transportation fuels, electricity from grid, national grid electricity, to specific technologies like our baseline LCAs for supercritical pulverized coal plants. It also compare with the baselines, we can get a sense for how the process or portions of the life cycle may need to improve to perform on par or better than existing technologies. We use it to compare technologies and scenario trade-offs. Say we have two ways to produce widget X. Does the LCA indicate that one is environmentally preferable to the other? What if we use renewable energy to power our production facilities? Can we see significant improvements in that scenario? And finally, we use LCA to plan for the future and look ahead. Right now, widget X uses electricity from a grid that is carbon intensive. What will those products' environmental footprint look like in 20 years in a decarbonized grid? Does the facility have direct CO2 emissions that it needs to reduce under this future scenario as the grid electricity becomes less important in their life cycle and their direct emissions become dominant? We choose LCA to guide research and development investment, to choose technologies that are environmentally better than existing technologies, to evaluate the best opportunities in existing systems for emissions reductions. We identify data gaps and validation needs to improve decision-making. In developing LCAs and the processes that make up an entire lifecycle model, we often run into situations where we don't have any data on an existing process. These represent opportunities to work with industry, to develop the emissions profiles for those processes, or invest in technology to help industry better measure those emissions. And finally, use it to assess potential benefits from commercializing technologies. At what scale does a new technology begin to make a meaningful difference in emissions? The application of LCA to CCUS systems in particular is, I guess, somewhat new. They're unique because they combine two usually disparate sectors, potential CO2 sources, such as a carbon capture equipped power plant or methanol, and a methanol facility, for example. While any industrial facility is likely to use electricity, CCUS results in a system that provides both products, both methanol and electricity. There are a variety of potential sources and even more potential uses of CO2, as shown in the graphic. And these are just the ones we kind of know about now. LCA needs to provide a comparison of this integrated system with a combination of life cycle systems that provide the same function. So you would have a separate electricity generation facility, or more likely a combination of electricity generating facilities, and a conventional methanol facility. A consistent approach is necessary to ensure comparability for robust decision making. NETL has developed the CO2 utilization LCA guidance toolkit to address the needs of the DOE's carbon conversion program that Amishi talked about earlier. Originally in this toolkit, it was for our PIs, and it was focused on coal. The following few slides will look at how the toolkit improves the clarity and specificity of existing ISO guidance on LCA, ensuring accuracy of LCAs developed by personnel new to the LCA framework, and minimizing the effort required to perform the LCAs. So how do we improve clarity and specificity of the existing guidance? First, the guidance included in the toolkit is compliant with ISO 14040 and 14044. Additional guidance is needed for the specific to the CO2 utilization systems. An understanding of the various feedstocks and technology pathways allows us to focus on issues specific to the carbon conversion systems and to tailor the guidance to work through the issues likely to come up in their development. This leads to guidance to ensure methodological consistency when applying those ISO standards. In general, the ISO standards are much more of a framework and are meant to provide guidance for a wider range of applications for every kind of product and any kind of industry, which can lead to inconsistency, as there are choices available within that framework. Our guidance also defines the goal and scope of an LCA study based on the project's technology readiness level to aid in developing these LCAs from bench scale testing through commercialization. But probably much less relevant to this audience. I mean, I think ideally you're already producing, you're already at TRL level 7 or above. Yeah, but our PIs are usually in different situations like lab scale and bench scale testing. We help ensure accuracy of the LCAs developed by personnel new to LCA by providing one-on-one support through the development process. Again, this is something that's been available to our program PIs. We'll work with them to kind of answer the questions, learn the software, and work with the data they need to. We complete a technical review of all the LCAs that the PI submit as part of their program or their the deliverables, and we'll iterate to correct or improve those life cycle analysis and can feel good about kind of the final product being accurate. We provide guidance and data to ensure consistency and repeatability. Consistent data for common and usually environmentally significant inputs are provided in a data set so that we can compare these different projects together on a consistent data set. Everybody's using the same electricity or is at least using the same method to get your electricity impacts. And lastly, providing guidance on scenario development and methodological decisions. And then how we minimize the effort needed for PIs to complete LCAs. So LCA in general is not widely practiced. It's likely, and we'll have a question on this later actually, that there might not be LCA expertise in your organizations. And the same exists for these programs, right? These people are usually, focused on developing their specific technology and haven't had to think about, where they're going to get their natural gas from. How does that the matter? So how does it matter? And to avoid them having to put that work in themselves, we want to provide the data and the tools in place to allow them to kind of more easily do this. Again, we mentioned, we'll get talk about it later, but yeah, we'll provide data, we'll provide report templates, guidance on developing your goal and scope, modeling, results interpretation, and finally reporting. This is the kind of landing page for the CO2 LCA guidance toolkit, which we had up here before. The starting point is the guidance document. So that is basically the how to perform an LCA for the CO2 utilization projects under the program. I don't know, it's probably a couple hundred pages long in PDF, but very important to read through and understand what decisions or why we've made the decisions we have and how you should perform your LCA. Kind of following along counterclockwise, there's a documentation spreadsheet. The overall goal is that we'll provide the guidance and tools for developing the rest of your life cycle. You should know your systems well enough to be able to provide that data in the same way that our techno-economics team provides us the performance data for the power plants that we can plug into the rest of the life cycle. So the documentation spreadsheet is there for that. There's the training resources, the videos that Amishi mentioned earlier. The subject matter expert support is, we help our projects, our PIs, one-on-one. Let me see, maybe I'll skip over to the Open LCA database. So our tool of choice at NETL right now is Open LCA is a freely open source lifecycle analysis tool, as opposed to some paid products like Gavi, SEMA Pro, are like kind of two widely used programs in the industry. This database provides those, the emissions from electricity and natural gas, again, common inputs to the systems that we're looking at. And then an Excel tool, the Open LCA contribution tool, will help to create the graphs that we ask PIs to create for comparing your product system versus the kind of business as usual. All of these things are available at the link at the bottom here. Lastly, the full toolkit will get the entire giant zip file of everything. It's like 150 megabytes. And you can go look at the changes in the version history to that. So, more recently, we added biomass profiles to support a recent funding opportunity announcement. Oops. Yeah, we also talked about the 45Q addendum to the toolkit earlier. We recognize that there were things applicable to only our PIs, and that that the IRS was interested in getting a point number, right? In our toolkit, we ask that investigators do things like uncertainty analysis or scenario analysis and provide us a range of answers so that we can know, how sensitive their analysis is to natural gas inputs. None of that is applicable to a 45Q, right? They just want how much carbon dioxide are you preventing from going into the atmosphere so we can give you a tax credit based on that number. Yeah, it is a companion to the guidance document. So the guidance document forms the basis. The addendum kind of modifies it, and it clearly tells you like which sections are, more explanation is needed, or what sections should be replaced. Again, our goal is to provide a similar sort of document for this program, and honestly, would probably look pretty similar. We also looked at this earlier. So I don't really want to belabor this too much, other than to note the kind of iterative, or I hesitate to say collaborative, but a more open dialogue between applications, the companies that are making these products, and us as NETL or DOE as the reviewers. In the 45Q paradigm, that's a really gated process where we, LCAs come in and we have kind of one communication out to the applicant, and then they come back in later. We'd really like to work with the applicants, again, because we recognize that the LCA expertise might not be out there in general, and that our requirements are more stringent, and there's a lot to them that need to be considered for this grant program. Also wanted to highlight that we're not doing this in a vacuum, right? So we talked about having our own CO2 use toolkit. We have been participating in these kind of global work groups, the International CCU Assessment Harmonization Group. All the participants are shown here, and also American Center for Life Cycle Assessment and Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, LCA of Emerging Technologies Work Group. The kind of methods that we're talking about here, where we're looking at combined products in this whole total product system, which is getting at, your source of CO2 matters in your analysis, is adopted and kind of recognized throughout as a need to ensure comparability between different LCAs. Our collaboration with this International CCU Assessment Harmonization Group has resulted in several peer-reviewed articles in Frontiers in Climate, linked here. Again, just to highlight that, this isn't NETL dictating how CO2 use should go. We're working with others and kind of developing it in real time. Real quick on kind of this grant program and environmental product declaration. So you might know that EPDs are becoming more and more commonly used. I think EPDs are required for like the California Buy Clean program. And why this grant program would not just be simply accepting those EPDs. Number one, an EPD is just, I guess, to use LCA speak, an attributional analysis of a single system. They only have to account for their product and their product only in that specific area. That doesn't require a comparison system to know if there are GHG reductions. And then we also, again, want to make sure that carbon oxide sources are adequately characterized. I think a lot of the EPDs have been developed with kind of current technology in mind. I'm not sure how forward-looking they are, such as using CO2. And then I guess we're touching real quick on whether the LCAs for this program would be used for EPDs or kind of be relevant to other programs like ByClean. We won't be directly creating EPDs because we're not also following the PCR rules that go along with creating those EPDs, but the lifecycle model that is created as part of this process can be used to create those EPDs. I mean, at their basis, the EPDs are backed by life cycle analyses. I think that's all I had for now. I've got, please email Greg Cooney with any of your questions. And then, yeah, the link to the toolkit.
LCA is more of a requisite for an R&D effort, and you have to demonstrate posing makes sense from an LCA perspective, or is it at the end final report you have to have done an LCA to submit at the end of
Both. For this particular program, right, we're talking about having an LCA done upfront to get your product approved. From a programmatic standpoint, I think that's been kind of run the full gamut. From now with the more recent FOAs, we're asking for preliminary LCAs to be done to kind of help in that screening process. And a lot of the ones prior to that, I believe the focus was on having an LCA done early in the project to kind of help you focus your research and see where you might want to kind of reduce your energy use or whatever, where you might make improvements. And then again, at the like a final product. The ones might have only been a final LCA. That's one that I've recently done. It depends on the funding opportunity announcement that they were awarded under.
I have a dumb question. So difference between TEA and LCA sensitivity analysis and TEA is a bigger thing, or what, trying to wrap my head around.
I would say TEA is focused on the process, the product itself. So focused only on your electricity generating facility. And looking at the various scenarios under which it might operate. LCA expands that by including what does it take to get your fuel out of the ground to power that plant.
I don't know where the battery was. PEA is really looking at your CO2 input, ATP input, you're really kind of don't care other than what the cost is or LCA. How is that? Electricity.
Thank you.
No, I'm curious. All the focus right now. What's the on water?
In our analyses, water is something that is considered, but analyses performed by the NETL LCA team. It's amongst other environmental impacts such as acidification, eutrophication. I'm not sure from a programmatic standpoint. I recognize its importance. Obviously, it wasn't in scope for kind of this grant program. I don't know that we can really comment on that outside of that, I guess. Well, I had the links to these. The harmonization group kind of gets at that. That's one of their kind of goals is tailoring your LCA to be kind of like full scale at the end, or what kind of things you might have to think about in order to scale up your pilot scale data, or what sorts of things you need to think about to get up to scale. I think in terms of, again, our programmatic guidance covers that kind of how the LCA should change according to your TRL level. I would say that's not something we really talk about in 45Q because, again, the presumption is you're applying for a tax credit for something you already did create. Presumably you have data saying how you created that, like what your electricity inputs and fuel inputs were for that. And I would say that's probably is similar to this. We've had discussions about, pre-application, I guess, or pre-approval, and how that might go. But that's something we're still kind of working through, how we might be able to.
Right, I want to find the early adopter. I want to show that this works, show you the data, and then now I want to scale it up full or something. Trying to convince them that probably get these tax credits. It's difficult with them to buy into it. Thought through at least.
Yeah, and again, kind of scenario analysis, your friend to or sensitivity analysis, right? Like you can go try to assess a worst case scenario, right? And maybe make a business case that way. Like, under the worst case conditions, you're likely to get something. Your LCA is probably not going to change that drastically between in your scale up that you would kind of approach that kind of worst scale. So I don't know.
I think you called it gated when he talked about our IRS process. And it is very much gated. It's a lot of taxpayer information. IRS is the one that establishes a lot of the policy, a lot of the data requirements, how we would be interacting with taxpayers and what more or less can be submitted to us in terms of eligibility. So we don't have much say besides creating a methodology and providing the verification that someone, followed that methodology. So in terms of 45Q and IRS, we assist, right? We don't make those decisions on whether or not they are approved. We are a step in that evaluation process. However, the beauty of the UP grants program, because that is squarely at DOE, it is squarely in FECM, and our leadership leaned on us about this to create a more iterative, collaborative process on the LCA place. That's one of the values of having this program out there, is it helps to create that LCA competency and awareness within industry, because IRS is almost, like Matt said, gated. So hopefully this program could help alleviate some of those concerns, or the black box nature of approvals. Mhm. And we are a step in that process, because they know, or has how it's written, the statute it's written, it does rely on our technical competency, but via that mechanism, our technical competencies can't be shared, or really, it's much harder to translate some of that knowledge to industry. This program, as it's a demonstration grant program, it enables us to work alongside applicants in a not so gated format.
Next up, we have Dr. David Wood, Director of Engineering at Sky Nanotechnologies, to discuss CCUS opportunities for CO2 derived carbon nanostructures via molten carbonate electrolysis. So with that, David, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And don't worry, this won't be a technical talk, but this is the process that we're using, molten carbonate electrolysis. Okay, whoops. So the fundamental challenge, I think is well documented today. We have on the left, a nice graph showing we have on the left side of the slide 2. There we go. Showing population growth, we have more and more people, and the people are using more, each unit is using more energy. And then on the right, facing the environmental destruction, and I do really look at it as that level of crisis. So what are some of the things Sky Nano is doing about that? So we have a CO2 negative process. We take in carbon dioxide from either the atmosphere or a point source, and we carbonate a lean electrolyte of lithium carbonate. And then we plate out of that carbonate carbon nanotubes or carbon nanomaterials. And in the process, after that chemistry, our only byproduct on the right is shown as pure oxygen. So we're just literally stripping 2 oxygen atoms off carbon and making high value carbon nanomaterials at much lower cost than once we reach our maximum scale than it's capable with the chemical vapor deposition process that's used today. So carbon nanotubes, what's excellent about them is they have, depending on the number of walls or layers of graphene, they have excellent mechanical properties, thermal and electrical, as shown in the bottom right figures. But the problem is they cost too much to use. Even the cheapest ones, lowest quality, super high volume that you could buy from China, let's say, are still $100 a kilo. And carbon black is about $20 to $25 a kilo, you know, depending on some other price factors there. So what we're looking to do is start with the current CNT market and get a sort of a beachhead there, which is like aerospace and specialty applications. Then there in the second circle, you have adapters, which are the early markets to achieve, say, like thermal coatings for de-icing, electromagnetic interference shielding. And then the third circle is the adopters, which are a little bit more midterm in terms of adopting nanotubes or carbon nanomaterials, that being like lithium ion batteries and tires. And then you have finally the converters, where you're talking gigatons of CO2, where you might have concrete building materials, textiles, you know, coatings, highways, things like that, the big volume applications that are further out. So this is just a timeline of Sky Nano. We're about 5.5 years old. We've raised about $8.75 million in that time. It's all non-diluted funding. So we like to thank you know, the people the local people, and that's part of what this talk is about, that helped us get going, or helped Anna get going. That being the Innovations Crossroads program at Oak Ridge, funded by AMO. And the fossil energy and ARPA-E offices of DOE as well, moving from 2020 and into 2021 and 2022. So what we've also done is scale up our production quite a bit. Last year by about 20x, and this year we're in the process, just having moved out of this building and into a new building, we'll be scaling up another 50-fold by the first quarter of next year, of next calendar. So this is just a quick look at our team. We're still small, but you know, very diverse in skill set. There's 6 of us full-time, 3 of us part-time. The 2 founders, Anna Douglas, the CEO and CTO, Carrie Pint, who's right now a professor at Iowa State, and he comes and works with us at some. So what I mentioned in terms of markets, we think that existing markets would be something like 20 megatons per year, or 0.2 gigatons per year. That's kind of a drop in the bucket, right? And we certainly don't think that we need to make 500 or so gigatons, you know, that being the total amount of CO2 that we want to take out, roughly, that we need that many nanotubes either. So the answer is somewhere, you know, in the middle in terms of what new markets would support at the gigaton per year level. And of course, we're supporting an equitable energy transition in our decarbonization efforts as well. So just real quickly here, 3 challenges that we see are the nascent nature of large institutions collaborating with each other. Unclear, pathway for small or new entities to utilize regional resources. We've had a lot more success than some others have, but would offer some input in terms of navigating some of those pitfalls locally. And then thirdly, lack of local buy-in to carbon management compared to other regions of the country. But there are some really nice opportunities here as well. That being that Oak Ridge National Lab is here with quite a few projects that have been supported at a very high level on carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And again, mentioning the Spark Innovation Center, which is in this building where we are now, and has dedicated lab space for startups at an incubator, very small level, very, helpful in terms of resources at a very, affordable rates. And so then there's Launch Tennessee, the state government matching funds on SBIRs and STTR grants. They've also helped us with intern support and training and programming. And then I mentioned Innovation Crossroads as an advanced manufacturing office program that was crucial in getting Sky Nano as far off the ground as we are. Let's put it that way. And then finally, this is just a slide. We have had a lot of sponsors to get us to this point, and I want to make sure that I give them a chance to be seen on the slide. Thanks for your attention. Yeah, like early adapters, well, that's probably technicality there. I'm not entirely sure, but we more mean the timeline for those particular applications. I suppose you could call them both early adopters and midterm adopters. But the key being the 1 to 5 years versus 3 to 8 year markets, like battery additives. We want to replace at least a portion of the carbon black that goes into advanced lithium ion batteries. Now that you know how strict OEM companies can be with those kinds of qualifications, and so that could take many years to do to guarantee that you can have the same safety and performance standards that carbon black material is provided over.
Yeah.
One slide you have permanent, resident, technical, thermal. Yes, exactly. So if you talk about the single wall nanotube, which is shown down in the bottom left corner, and then a multi-wall tube is just more and more cylinders around the inner cylinder. The properties start to, like mechanical, it starts to get less strong per unit mass, not quite as conductive thermally, and graphite or fiber type material. So those are the kinds of morphologies we can control. And yes, it does greatly affect final product properties. Sure.
Both the oxygen.
Yeah, we'd probably bottle that up and sell it as a byproduct. That's always been the plan, but it's that middle part where the devil's in those details right now. So that's where we're spending a lot of our time. But the oxygen, yes, it's very pure. It's probably 97% O2, and if operated correctly, only about 3% CO. It's nearly pure. Sure. Thank you.
And not seeing any questions online, if we could give David another round of applause. And our next speaker is Bill Easter, CEO of Sem Plastics, to discuss their carbon conversion and utilization opportunities and overview of that with Sem Plastics technology.
Can you hear me? Is that working? So thank you. Thanks for Aaron. Thanks for inviting us here today. We would be without the NETL, without the Department of Energy, what you're going to see would not have happened. So, and we're going to talk a little bit. I am a geek, so there's technology sneaks in there some ways, but we're really going to look at products and how material systems impact products, because just because you make material system doesn't mean that it's already in a form that can be a product that someone can buy. So, and I may not have gotten the total memo on what carbon conversion is, but there is carbon, it is getting converted, and I will get to the CO2 at the end of the story, but it's more of a capability and what one can do with technology and where we are. So we're going to be talking about a carbon utilization framework. We're going to be talking about carbon derived building materials development, lithium ion battery applications, and I did promise we would get to CO2 based building materials. And so we are a company that's in, Sem Plastics is in Orlando, Florida, outside of UCF. And we have a manufacturing site in Bluefield, West Virginia, and that company's called XMAT. And so you'll be seeing a lot of things. We're jumping back and forth between those two companies, but really it's about building products and jobs and moving the technology forward. So we'd like to talk about what we call a Kainos carbon framework. And in Kainos, you're repurposing both undervalued and waste carbon feedstocks to create valuable, customized, sustainable products. And when you hear the word sustainability, it usually means environmentally sustainable. And that's super important, but it also has to be economically sustainable. And the question is, will this continue? If it's not economically sustainable, it won't continue. And I use a joke about, in Orlando, we put plastics in this green bucket. You know, we put all our recycled plastics in there. And there's always a question, where does it go? Does it just go to the landfill? Are they doing something with it? What happens to it? And right, so if you're making money on it, then it continues to happen and it will move forward. So what kind of carbon feedstocks are we talking? Well, you can say, Bill, that's the geologic produced waters. Well, that's one thing that we're combining with another thing. Spent graphite from lithium ion batteries, that's recycled materials, CO2 gas, coal and coal waste, and fly ash, which comes from burning coal. And what do? We process those things. We make engineered aggregates. We make high value products, carbon negative building materials, coal derived building materials, high capacity nanomaterials for lithium ion batteries, high temperature 3D printing filaments, high performance plastic fillers. So all these things, I can take things that are basically waste or undervalued streams and I turn them through processing into something that's high value. And why does it have to be high value? Because if I get enough margin, we had a margin question earlier, which is a good question. But if I don't have enough margin, I can't pay my employees, my suppliers, my customers don't get value. It's about value and perceived value. It's not just, you know, people pay you more for higher value, and then how do you split that up and who gets it? So we talk about carbon derived building materials experience. So what are the benefits of these XMAT materials? They're fireproof. So even though that they come from coal, they're no longer, they're really a ceramic, been transformed. They're lightweight, they're stronger, more insulating, and they encapsulate impurities, which I will show you. So they beneficiate some of the environmental damage that's happened with some of these materials. The economic benefits, job creation, carbon utilization, the carbon sequestered, they're lighter, improved labor productivity, reduced transportation costs. So this one is a panel that we've made, 16 by 32 inch. This was made in West Virginia, and you can see they're coal-based ceramic aggregates. Some of this is a total ceramic piece as well, and this is what we call the X panel, and that is something that we would like to make out of CO2 particles, same way to have people buy those things. So this is just an example of the capability we have to make these big form factors, because again, just because you've made material in a test tube, then all of a sudden you have to scale that up and get it in a bigger product. Here are our X tiles. So these have, we've made a square. It's gone and passed certain specifications. Again, just because you make a building component, you know, will the buyer buy it? Has it passed certain specifications? This is class 4 hail. We're down in Florida, Miami Dade, we got hurricanes, always worried about that. So we passed these water absorption, flexible testing things, change the colors. Blocks. So, and it's lightweight aggregate, we say lighter, one's 32 pounds, standard block, this one about 20. Also fly ash products. So you may not know this, but fly ash or calcium carbonate, talc, and polyolefins to hundreds of billions of pounds. So what could we do with you know, fly ash that's still around? You say, well, we quit burning the coal, but you still got pounds and pounds and pounds and tons. You know, some of them are in unlined storage areas, and they need. Can we remediate it? Those materials. So we made structural columns on the right that we were able to make a better product by coating it polypropylene. Yeah.
Hey, Bill. Yeah, if you could just check the mic real quick.
Okay, I know I didn't touch it. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think
For now?
yeah.
Okay. So you can see the fly ash. So again, these, you know, my power buddies would say all these are below the limit. Okay, so no one panic. you know, this is deleterious or anything, but the point is the processing brings it down from, you know, 0.296 milligrams per liter, and you go down to, you can't measure it for arsenic, just a little bit for chromium, a little bit selenium, and that's whether if we make it in ceramic, it completely encapsulated it, and then in the plastic composite, it's significantly reduced as well. So this is a beneficiation for, again, how are we going to use these waste products if they have all this junk in it, right? So this, how close can I get to human beings, and what can I do with it? Okay, and here's, we did build a wall section in West Virginia, and we have to build a coal building, right, Joe? So we're going to be doing all these products, and so again, that no matter what we're doing with the coal is going to help us with the CO2, because we're going to develop the processes and have the volume and scale capability. Lithium-ion battery applications. So this is to take everything. So you say you guys are doing so many different things, and my wife's like, "What are you doing? You've got so many different things." And I finally said, "We're doing one thing. We're taking this inorganic polymer and we're changing the silicon carbon oxygen ratio, changing viscosities, changing the ceramic yield. We may have 230 flavors, but they're doing things that they need to do for a particular material system, and that's what everything's coming from this. So even though the applications are all over the place, it's like really only doing one thing. And so we take that resin, we put it with coal or coal waste powder or recycled graphite. We do the pyrolysis, and we make you know, active anode materials, and then we make a electrode out of it. So and we've been tuning this and working on this for a while. Again, kudos to Joe. You gave us a great project. So we're actually we're going to make a 18650 out of coal with this thing, and there's a lot of scientists will tell you that's impossible. It has to be 99.98% pure, and here's the data. So I apologize for geeking out too much here, but if you look, so what is this? The coal anode is on the left. So what this shows, and this is data, third-party data from the Battery Innovation Center in Indiana. So this is the second go around of it. So this material, this coal went 1,000 cycles. And a cycle is I charge and discharge that battery, right? So I charge and discharge that battery, and every time I do that, that's a cycle. And so you go, I got 2,000 cycles. And then if you look at the right, this is with recycled graphite. So if you look at the blue line, it kind of dies off. And again, this was made, we didn't make this, it was a third party. So using graphite, good graphite, kind of graphite, you know, that people use to make car batteries, ours looked like this magic little thing is getting you double the life of the battery. And so, and that's pretty cool and pretty spectacular. But that may not be the most spectacular thing, and that's not that interesting. CO2. So we're going to talk about CO2 based building materials. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take this magic. First, we're going to make mixed carbonate, and we're going to do that by taking two waste streams. We're going to bubble CO2 gas through wastewater, and in this case, it's produced water. In the experiment, you'll see is a guy. So I'm glad we have carbon monoxide is covered by your carbon monoxide. We had a pickup truck and hooked the pickup truck, bubbled it through, kept pouring enough base in there to drop out. If we use produced water, if you know anything about water, it should be called co-produced water. Make oil, gas, byproduct. It's incredible that the total solids are like 200,000. But in inside of that, there's always divalent. 1,000. So this carbonate, gaseous CO2, water, and then we don't wail on it too much. So, but 3,000 PSI flex spring. You can say that would be a high value building. I think that could be a backsplash or kitchen counter or whatever. And so call this process diaquest. And so I don't really care where the CO2 comes. You get it, comes in a pipe, comes off a whole stack, comes off an ammonia plant, comes from direct capture from the air. I don't really care. So we'll do that, and then we'll mineralization that Joe's talking about. So carbonate, and it's a mixed carbonate. So we don't care if it's calcium, strontium, magnesium, whatever comes with it. That's part of it. And then we use our resin here. But what's kind of cool about this, especially if you're in the Permian, if you look a lot, if I unzip, what scale in the pipes? Divalent. So if I get rid of the divalent, here I have almost a mined water, that's geological water that has all these elements in it. Can I then take those elements and get value out? So pretty excited. I use it. I don't know. Anyway, so that's kind of what we're working on CO2, and open for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. We have a question that came in online. And this was before the kind of CO2 utilization part. But how do you test these materials for toxic inputs such as arsenic, selenium, etc.?
So we actually do the leaching. So RP has done leaching everything really good. The results are really good. This is the beneficiary property technology. Help. Elements or problems. I'll say outside of radio. Certainly lead, arsenic.
Good. Could you just repeat that just into the mic for a little bit more?
So yeah, so we can beneficiate most of the elements, I say, except for radioactive. Certainly lead, arsenic, flint, detrimental to human. Again, how can we live with this? Even look how many coal finds, billions of pounds. By acid, onset. Power companies are going to have to deal with it one way or another. At some point, we have to deal with it. But some of these ones aren't.
Got it. Thank you. And then you said that ERC had verified a lot of that.
Yes,
That's
they
up
do
in North
leaching
Dakota.
tests. Basically, they run all acid over. That's nice. Polymer matrix, concrete.
Got it. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, yep.
Yeah, I was just curious about the produced water that you're planning to use or are using. I guess you already ran your truck through it. Is the thought right now that you're just going to end up probably injecting that water into disposal wells, or?
Well, so that's a great question. So Interesting thing you may not notice about fracking, but earthquakes are not caused by the fracking. Earthquakes are caused by the injection of water down. Putting such a volume in there. So I think what we're saying is we would provide a way. So with the program that we started, we probably using saltwater disposal well. But again, you look longer term, you go, and I didn't know any of it. I'm not a oil and gas guy. It's like, so in the Permian, it's almost for every barrel of oil that you produce, 5 barrels. You're in a very arid region, and there you are with this, and because you can't use it, the brines are really bad. So what if you could take out the divalent, then all of a sudden you unzip everything, like a salinization, like a chemical plant, you know, and you start pulling these elements out. So I think there's a whole lot of value. And could you make the water used for agriculture? So it's a tremendous resource. It's a problem. Could we turn it into, you know, benefit or something like that? And so this technology, while helping out, we'll see if it's also could have some of the elements in there. So if you look at mining, right, so you have all these elements, 300,000, unbelievable. And so it's already, the mine is already in there. Can I reach in there and grab lift?
Okay, multiple questions. Maybe one comment that you do when you synthesize to the one thing you do. That was a lot of things with that one vial. So that was complicated. But I guess the two questions, one pretty quick, the ASTM ratings, you said you were able to, you know, secure approval for them. How long did that process take?
That took a couple of years.
From start to finish or?
That's a phase 2, that's a phase 1 and a phase 2 program for the DOE. Meet all those requirements. It is, I mean, you're exactly right. It is daunting to get those things. So, you know, again, I made the comment, the material system is one, material properties is one thing, and then products, the proper size and the proper stuff.
And in that approval process, was it time that was one of the biggest hurdles, or was it getting enough material or having enough funding?
It was really, so it's an interesting, so it's an entrepreneurial thing. You're improving your properties as you move along. So you're actually improving your properties scale at this time. We sort of knew, so for us, we had what was already out there and we're breaking it and seeing where they are, and it's like, man, if I can't do as good as them, I didn't make it yet. I'm not going to waste my money on the test. So we always kind of try to find analogs that are already out there. Great question.
And then, sorry, last question. Obviously with building materials, it's the one pathway in carbon conversion that has a really durable product, and durability is the overlap with our CDR, carbon dioxide removal perspective. In the ASTM or in your development, do you test for how long the CO2 is stored, or its permanence, or like end of like lifespan of the product?
You're gonna think I see you know, that you're a tell out in the so we've done, they call it TGA demographic analysis. So so as long as you keep your low 600 C permanently sequestered, so you use the word anthropogenic. So 1/3 of the Earth's crust is limestone, calcium. talking about kind of making our own. Do not, especially that white piece also. It'll past that point.
Awesome, thank you. And I think Aaron had a couple questions.
We haven't verified, so we're getting a little jumping ahead of things, getting our own little reactor, Aaron. You can come down to Orlando and see it. We're gonna change the to know, the carbonation form. Got a lot of chemists here. That's not a hard thing. Yeah. I don't think so. I mean, in fact, we were just out in North Dakota and talking to. But they told us that, oh man, how are we gonna do all these different? We're gonna get on the stack but how are we gonna get all this to test it? And they basically said, get it analyzed. Air gas will make whatever different concentrations in it. That's that. Wow, that's glad I came out. I'm glad you told me rather than me getting hurt or somebody else getting hurt trying to.
Hello. Or decent.
I think that depends on the scale. I mean, if you look at a power plant, how much, or ammonia plant, ethanol plant, how much ethanol, how much, what's the volume? So little volume. I mean, I could think of a way you could have almost virtuous circle out in the thick oil and gas where take the flare, you run the whole thing and you take the CO2 from that, and then you kind of are running the energy is coming from the excess and you're getting the CO2, but you're capturing it. So I don't want to say perpetual motion, but somehow you could have a virtuous circle sort of out in the drilling. The key then is all these things. Am I at a high enough level? How much can I sell at the high level? Right. So how much, what's that white part? And then what do I do with the rest? Then transportation. Building materials, look at it, it's always about where's the market? I'm selling it, and how far do I have to move? Those are like.
Speaking of markets, and with this being kind of a Southeast regional workshop, are you finding much demand in Florida or in the Southeast in general, or are you really having to go all across the country?
I think one of the interesting things of building material. So, Joe, we might not have picked the worst thing. The roof tile has to, I mean, the roof is like your foundation. It's got to hold up, and it always happens. I think if you can get facades and panels where you don't have the structural and or you get it inside the house, requirements are. We're still pulling this out. I mean, that's how hard. Aaron, you said it's going to take a while. It's all right. It takes a while to get building materials there. I think we build this building. I think we'll be ready and we'll be able to change the particles. The particles, fly ash, polarized ceramics. In fact, joke that you make one product with different variations of all these.
And then one follow-up question to that, on the same kind of regional theme, do you have any other kind of utilization or manufacturers utilizing CO2, anyone who you're kind of like bouncing ideas off of, or competition in that space? Or are you kind of like an island in Central Florida?
New ideas are always hard. You have to kind of, or that won't work. Then, a couple months later, how do you flip somebody from being a skeptic, being your biggest cheer? In some sense, honest skeptics are the best people going. Because if you can flip them by data, then they really. So you sort of, if you're not in materials, if you're not in it for a long period of time, don't get in. I don't know of any worse. Maybe pharmaceutical drugs that take 14 materials is awful. You have to be a little of a masochist to get in materials, because it is 10 years. I mean, oh, not me, I got the greatest material. It's still going to be 10 years, and then how much you posture in front of the mirror, it's going to be that long. So I think you have to be patient, and that, again, thank you, DOE, thank you for supporting us. And so I showed you the coal stuff, and you're like, we don't care about the coal anymore. We're into the CO2. It's like, well, but those things moved us along path and kept us going, and kept the R&D going, kept all this. It's all necessary.
You approach sort of likely.
We've talked to people that have talked to lead. We're still not quite there yet, right? So we need to have it. You'd only say the only product that probably could go would be the roof tile. But I think that's a difficult one. So all ceramic products are tough. If we can, and you come over and look at, we got cold pieces. There's a beautiful little piece of ceramic or X matrix, which is those are easier to get in, where we just take the particle and put it with cement, or we take the particle and put it with plastic. Those are easier ones to get in. I think the roof one is a challenge. All ceramic. That's the most difficult. Take in mind. When we talk to people, part of this, it's hard to understand the scale. So we're coming from a test tube onto beaker. Now we're in a 55-gallon drum, and really you have to get to railroad cars. But before you really can talk about once you get to railroad cars, then it's like, okay, I can take you serious. Because even some of the people that have said, I want to check your stuff out, I need 3 tons. That's just to do a test. Some of these high-end construction people are like, and we're going to take 2 years to build 10 tons of material, 10 tons of particles. So we're on the path. I mean, we're getting there, but that's next time.
They were about 7.5.
So she's tracking me that we as she says, you need to sell a child here. So we're very mature, very experienced, otherwise known as OLD. Any other questions, thoughts? Thank you for the questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Really appreciate it.
Today I've been asked to do about these carbon studies. And I spent a lot of time studying. And because I wasn't what was going on, but I wanted to a whole picture. Do the whole picture. Water cell needs derived that's like and then how some things are going to help with carbon Okay. I always start with this slide to give a reality check of what we're up against. There's 40 gigatons to climate change by 1.5 to 2. Have to reduce it about 10 by 20. There's big numbers. Always big. So, the National Academy of Science in 2019, it was stated that targets climate goals and technology children. Okay, so we can talk about the politics of this.
I'm just gonna.
Let's see if that's okay. 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 So for part of the net negative emissions, we need direct air capture, but a lot of that, the cost is got to get down below $100 per ton. And the goal is to do that within the next 10 years. But today, one of the things that we're going to wrap our mind around, and this is because we're part of the conversion utilization workshop here, is kind of understand that those goals are still going to have to be met to get to net negative, but also see what we can do with CO2 to make products. So here's why CO2 is the biggest problem. It's 80% of the composition of our greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation accounts for 29% of those CO2 emissions. And this is these numbers, even if you were to take them from the United States point of view versus the global, they're approximately the same. There's not much of a difference between global percentages versus the US percentages. So transportation's the largest at 29%. Electricity generation is 25% CO2 emissions. Industry is 23%. And one thing I'll touch on a little bit in our industry here is 7 to 8% of those emissions come from cement production. Then we have agriculture, 10%, commercial and residential. So I'm going to touch on the first three largest in this talk. So where are the problem? What's the problem in all of this? And this circle, what you see is things that are kind of flat to the circle that are the lighter colors in short distance, light transportation, residential, other industry, electricity at 26%. Then you have these other pies that kind of stick out. They're the hard sectors to decarbonize. Either we can't meet the demands because the energy that is required, like in aviation and shipping, marine, and long distance transport, or we have problems with load following electricity demands. The other high impact that's hard to decarbonize is iron, steel, and cement production. So this all adds up to about 9.2 gigatons of CO2 that we need to abate. And if you think about this, if we can say, oh, everything's going to be electrified and we're going to be able to take care of all those things that are within that circle, not the pies that are pulled out, but within that circle, that's the straightforward electrification that we can say, okay, we're going to put those with renewables. We all know that this is going to be hard to do with solar, wind, or other type of renewable processes. But just to give some perspective on this as well, and it comes back to big numbers again, the growth in renewable energy regeneration in the United States from 2000 to 2020 was only 5 quads of renewable energy generation. We need 70 quads to actually get all of those within that pie that aren't sticking out to actually be decarbonized with renewable electricity. Do you know what a quad is? It is a huge number. It is almost 300 billion kilowatt hours. And that to make 300 billion kilowatt hours, that is approximately 180 million barrels of oil, or 35 million tons of coal, or 980 billion cubic meters of, or cubic feet of gas. Again, I work on milliliter scales, so this was a big number. Okay, so what do our regional emissions look like? I really had to dig for this, and I didn't even realize this company existed here within Knoxville, actually, the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and they look at all the local electrification, the power generators in the area. And so they're looking at the emissions generated from all the Southeast. So TVA, Duke, I'm not picking on anybody here, but this is just the flat numbers. So they look at what they're producing and who's becoming more, who's decreasing their carbon emissions. In the upper left-hand corner, that graph is how many emissions in the Southeast of CO2 was generated by electrical power, transportation, industrial, or residential. This graph, again, seriously, is not much different than our global, our local charts. It's just less than the number of CO2 because it's just for the Southeast. The reason why you see electrical power start going down in CO2 emissions in about 2010 is because a lot of the coal plants are being converted to natural gas. So natural gas emits about half of CO2 emissions than coal does. Transportation, though, although it cuts off in 2019, is on the rise. And this is where a large part of our problem is going to come, because we all are getting back to flying. We all love our Amazon packages, and we all drive our car in the single lane. So how is that going to affect some of the decarbonization? And I'm going to go over that in the next couple slides. In the lower left-hand corner, that's just our power resources, and the orange appropriately is colored for Tennessee and TVA. And so, and then we have Duke and Oglethorpe and the others. In the right-hand corner, however, the map shows what we could potentially reduce our CO2 emissions by having renewable resources. And earlier I stated, that down around the Florida panhandle and those yellow lines, lower part of Georgia and Alabama, have the potential for solar resources. What scares me in this chart, though, is that's only about half of the Southeast region that's colored. The other part is white, and we don't have anything for white. So obviously we're going to probably stick with natural gas. Okay, so what does that look like with natural gas resources over the last 5 years or so? This is the combination of what our CO2 emissions are coming from and by generation resource, and 45% of that is gas. I'm just looking at 2019. We have 26% of nuclear, and 17% is coal, which is being reduced. 7% is other, probably, and then we have the last 5% of renewables. Okay, so principles of transportation. Everybody should know this. We're all smart. We are being pushed into electrifying our smaller vehicles, our small transportation, while our larger transportation is hard to electrify because of the amount of energy it requires, the long distance it requires, and I'm not going to fly a plane that has hydrogen in it. So, there are other types of alternative fuels that we need to be looking at, whether it be ammonia or the carbon resources that we can produce from CO2, hopefully. So what are the alternative fuel options? Hydrogen. So hydrogen, unfortunately, has low gravimetric and volumetric density. The problem is the storage is really hard. The storage mass, the equivalent of storage mass for diesel energy is 6 times that for hydrogen storage, based on the amount of tank and space that you need. Okay, so the possibility is that there has been some developments with Toyota and Nikola, I think it was, and where you can use hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen batteries. Ammonia, that's kind of looking at the marine sector a little bit more than anything. Marine can take a lot more abuse than some of our regular road transports. But the problem is, again, ammonia can oxidize to NOx. It has low gravimetric density than diesel, so it's not real favorable at the moment. Then you have biofuels. And biofuels, so shockingly, at the moment, only 4% of the biofuels are used in transportation worldwide. I was kind of shocked at that number, to be honest. I thought we had more than that. I know Jet is looking at this as like an ethanol to jet type for transportation of some of our aviation. So we look at synthetic hydrocarbons, so hydrogenation of CO2 from different feedstocks, whether it be off an ethanol plant, which is 99% pure CO2, or off a natural gas combustion combined cycle. So looking at that to potentially become carbon neutral, if you were to do this with electrolyzers, we would say, okay, we could be carbon neutral if we were using green hydrogen, using emission-free electricity, and CO2 from direct air capture. That's the pipe dream. The problem is electrolysis is really super expensive, but someday that could become cheaper. And then direct air capture, again, is expensive. So what are the considerations when you're thinking of capture and conversion? I say capture and conversion because I think it should be almost a one-stop shop. Can we do capture and conversion through one process instead of doing capture it singly and then regenerate it and then put it in the conversion process? So personally, I think if we could just ship it all through and have selective conversion, that would be really the pipe dream in this. The problem is being able to optimize that, being able to scale it. The cost, of course, is always going to be the most upfront, but I think we just need to give that time. And then, of course, like we've talked today, there's the life cycle analysis that needs to be done on this for all the different processes. So we're going to just throw everything at the wall. I think that's where we're at right now. We have to look at the energy intensity, of course, the stability and the regeneratability when we look at all these processes. So if we were just doing CO2 conversion, what are the ways to do CO2 conversion as of today? If we were to take CO2 from any resource, we can convert it through thermal catalysis, electrocatalysis, photocatalysis, plasma catalysis, or enzymatic to get some of our value-added chemicals and fuels. I haven't talked too much about the chemicals, but our chemicals are at detriment to here too, because big companies like Chevron are making ethylene. I was able to actually go to one of their plants here back in April, and the amount of ethylene produced out of one plant is it's insane. It's like is it like 12 million tons a day of ethylene out of this one plant, and that produces 120 rail cars of polyethylene a day pellets. So that's just one that was in Cedar Bayou. That was just one plant. Okay. So one of the things with catalysis is you can either go the homogeneous route or you can go the heterogeneous route. The homogeneous route is really never, it's good and it's selective and it does a good job, but the problem is you can never separate homogeneous catalysis out. And so you have separation problems in the end. Hence the other problem in converting anything to product. Heterogeneous catalysis is nice, but it's not very selective, and it's usually kind of expensive. So what are the products that we could produce from catalysis? This is a chemist stream. We have all the kinds of the chemistries that go from CO2 to either reduction or hydrogenation to formic acid, or to CO, all these different types of products that we could produce. So the problem is you're limited by efficiency and you're plagued by separations. So separations and typically in a power or in a plant is usually really the most expensive part. And so you want to keep cognizant of how you go about your separations. So all chemical reactions, as a chemist, I love to say this, all chemical reactions of CO2 proceed either at the nucleophilic attack of a central carbon atom or electrophilic coordination of all the oxygens. Okay, so, but all these products, that's great, we can make them maybe, but are they market viable? And so some of the two talks before me were showing some really nice market viable type solutions. But again, if we're getting away from petroleum or fossil fuels, that's our sources for these chemicals. So we need to find other ways of making them. Okay, so here's one of the projects that was recently funded. Thank you, Fossil Energy Carbon Management. This was a project that I have where I'm making a homogeneous or a heterogeneous catalyst that acts like a homogeneous catalyst. What it does is it efficiently separates CO2 out of streams selectively, and then it goes through a low temperature process, meaning a low temperature conversion at 30 degrees and at only 60 bar. And this is only a test case scenario right now. And we have a coal solvent in this because most processes do have an organic solvent. So we have a coal solvent in this, which is triethylamine. And what happens is under certain conditions in this process, I'm making formic acid. So I can tweak this to do other things too, by the way. I don't have to make formic acid. I can actually do the chemist thing that I do. And I can have different precursors for different conditions and get other types of materials out. So in this case, we're working on formic acid. It's a good hydrogen carrier for potentially our fuel cell cars or other products. So what happens at the end is it's going back to that separation problem. At the end, because I'm using a coal solvent, triethylamine and formic acid, just by density, they separate out. I can't get them to mix. They completely just can decant. So I don't have to do any separation in the end. I just drop it out basically out of a volumetric flask. So in this process, we're looking at all the different optimization parameters. Bruce Atkins is also on this project for doing our reactor modeling. And I have a great team of looking at other types of modeling and understanding kinetics and transformations. And then of course, we're wrapping in TEA, Lca to guide our economics and evaluations for feasibility. Really quick, when I look at pathway to products, I look at what is feasible, what is environmentally better. I don't want to make it worse than the current process. And is there a market target? And so in this left hand, where I have CO2 to products, you can kind of get an idea of what some of these costs. These might be actually a little bit old. They're a couple of years old number, but they haven't changed too much. But down in the right-hand corner is formic acid at $1,300 a ton. So it's not a bad product, right? We use it for a lot of things. It's continually to grow. BASF just actually built a plant in Louisiana for making formic acid. And so it's just going to continue to grow. But the one thing I wanted to understand as well is, am I making a worse process than it already is? So formic acid is traditionally produced through a toxic method of CO and methanol. And 800,000 tons of formic acid this was back in 2019. 800,000 tons of formic acid was produced per year. And that emitted 3,000 kilograms of CO2 per ton of formic acid. Whereas if I do it the CO2 hydrogenation process, I only emit 100 kilograms of CO2. So it's a little bit better. And it's not as toxic. Okay. All right. So one thing I wanted to go, did I miss this? No, it's okay. Okay, so one thing I wanted to continue on in some of the products that we are looking at in ORNL, we had a challenge within the lab. We have what's called an LDRD initiative. They're kind of seeded funding where we are doing carbon capture and conversion type projects. So they're two-year long projects. And part of the conversion was to ask for people to come up with ways to do carbon conversion in non-aqueous systems. And so one of them, on one of the projects, and I'm just going to lightly touch on these as I go through. One of the projects was to look at CO2 conversion electrochemically with supercritical CO2. Getting to supercritical CO2 is really easy because it's not easy, but it gets there pretty easy. It's at 31 degrees, 73 bar, you can get to supercritical CO2. You have low viscosity and enhanced stability of some of your products by being able to separate these things out from supercritical CO2. So the target here was to use supercritical CO2 with electrochemical processes with a carbon fiber catalyst support, and looking at trying to get products out such as ethanol, methanol, and formic acid. And so this has only been going on for 1 year, and they've been actually just doing the test setups for this. Okay, so one thing, so as you see, I'm going to step through to the cement real quick because I have a couple of projects behind it to go over how we're trying to abate some of the cement CO2. If you look at cement, you see that it is the major source of global CO2 emissions and also generates the most emissions per revenue dollar. So cement, just to give clarification, I'm not trying to devalue anybody's intelligence here, but cement is the glue of concrete. And so cement is really the process that has a lot of CO2 emissions. Down in the lower left-hand corner, you can see that in the clinker process, that 470 kilograms per ton of CO2 are emitted in the calcination of the limestone to make calcium oxide. And then, get my glasses for this one. And then the fossil fuels used to heat the clinker, which is like 1400 degrees Celsius, is about 319 kilograms per ton of CO2 emitted. So if we were to try to mitigate some of this cement process CO2 emissions, some of the things that we could potentially do is go through, making it more energy efficient. Well, everything in the world needs to be more energy efficient. Using alternative fuels. Well, that'd be great once we figure out the CO2 to conversion to CO2 fuels, right? Getting a clinker substitute. That's great, but the process is pretty well defined over ancient times that it started. So we have to look at new technologies in pulling out that CO2 or using the CO2 as part of the product process. And so one of the projects that Paula Brand and Lou is working on is not only using a binder that pulls CO2 into the lime process by adding this polymer, but it captures the CO2 and hopefully provides strength. So that's the purpose of that. And the calculation says the potential reduction of CO2 emissions by using this process would be reduced about 50% almost of CO2 emissions I'll get this straight. Emission, I'm getting tongue-tied. You know how it goes at the end of the day. Okay, so the potential to reduce the CO2 emissions is about 50% from the original process. Okay, next door, not too far from us, is Alabama, and it's the National Carbon Capture Center. It's managed by Southern Company with a collaborative agreement between Fossil Energy Carbon Management and NETL. And they do a lot of wonderful things of trying to abate or trying to help people with their research on carbon dioxide removal and carbon conversion. And so one of the projects I wanted to point out here, and this is just a screenshot of one of their at their webpage, if you want to go to their webpage. But one of the things I wanted to point out is to one of the recent successes is the CO2 utilization in the concrete. So going back to that cement concrete. So Carbon Built Technology, which is out of California, produced this very low no carbon concrete block. And they built this house in Alabama oh, what's the name of the company? I'm sorry. There's a local concrete company that they paired up with down in Alabama. I'm sorry, I forgot the name real quick. But anyways, they use this, what they call the reversive process, where they inject CO2 from flue gas and made more than 5,000 carbon concrete blocks. And this was the 2021 Carbon X Prize for Reversa. Okay, real quick, I'm trying to do my rounds on companies and what I could pull off the web. Eastman obviously is one of the biggest chemical producers in the local area. And of course, they do a lot of polymers. So they're looking at not only trying to reduce, we're trying to upcycle polymers or decompose polymers to be able to remove, to make again, but they have a lot of circular economy type actions going on, some of which is not on their website. And so I just put this up here where they start with a mechanical process of which most people are right now, of decomposing or mechanically recycling this, the plastics. And then they do methanolysis to get their precursors back for reproducing some of their products. With that said, one of the projects that we have within ORNL, I go back to the ethylene comparison where we're making, Chevron is making the polyethylene, and of course, Eastman uses ethylene as well. So going back to the LDRD initiative that I was talking about earlier, one of the projects that came out of that was making different types of electrochemical cells for non-aqueous solutions. So this was a non-aqueous electron proton mediated flow cell to reduce CO2 to ethylene. And so again, this is a first-year project. So they've been, they're getting ready to do a lot of their analysis at this moment. One of the last projects that I wanted to talk about is in the non-aqueous cell, non-aqueous electrochemical cell is this carbon capture and conversion to carbon nanomaterials by Shannon Murin. And Shannon is using a molten salt, lithium carbonate, for example, to convert CO2 to high value solid carbon products such as graphite. And they've been able to reduce their temperature. This usually happens at about 700 degrees. I think they said, Shannon said it gets down to about 500 degrees right now. I think he said yesterday, we talked to him. And so he's already made huge progress. And right now they're trying to get the structure under control for their graphitic versus amorphous type carbon that they're making. Okay, so if I were to, in the end, say, what would you need to do for process intensification? I would say, first of all, you need your versatile tool set. Understand the behavior and the characterization and performance of your energy conversion processes. This is going to have to go towards all conversion processes because this is unfortunately not one thing that goes, each product is a different path. And so there's going to be a lot of analysis to be done to understand the performance. We need to learn how to accelerate reactor design and development and reduce the cost. We're trying to do that in our project alone with doing multi-phase flow reactor modeling and simulation tools, always optimizing and scaling. So it's not just the chemistry that needs to be optimized, but the equipment that's married to the chemistry that's happening. And then look at the reduce system design risks. So all of that can hopefully be done by all these tangential experimental TEA, LCA analysis, kinetic modeling, and reactive modeling. So hopefully we can get that all on board. Real quick, just to make a statement about ORNL's commitment to strengthening the regional innovation ecosystem here. David Wood nicely presented the work that Sky Nano is doing, which was part of the birth from ORNL and the programs there. And then we have a lot of resources available for industrial partners and processes that we can work together on. And I think that's something that we need to do more of. We deploy to industry strategies and that is, we also do carbon fiber, if you don't know that. And we have a lot of automotive and additive manufacturing resources at our hands. Real quick, going back to that holistic value, and I won't even tell you that I know anything about CapEx. I just know that the consumer wants to know what they're going to pay in the end, and that includes myself. And so when I talk to companies and understanding their business cases, they want to know what their physical assets are going to cost to do any of these processes. Are they going to have to change equipment out? Are they going to have to change their transporting? Are they going to have to change their building structure? So infrastructure is going to be a huge part in doing any kind of chemical conversion in the foreseeable future. So it'd be nice if we could repurpose some of our current equipment that, refineries last 100 years. If we can get something in the current process the last 20 years, I think we're doing good. But it would be nice to have things made to be built for a long time. So what would convince industry to jump on board, do CO2 incentives, of course, repurposing some of the existing structure, and then location, and we've talked about this earlier, location of where the CO2 is coming from, where the hydrogen is coming from that I didn't talk to very much, and how to distribute the product. And then, of course, the efficiency of the processes are going to be really important, and the availability of cheap electric energy. So in summary, there's a lot of multiple pathways of CO2 to products. We need to identify the cost-effective and energy-efficient pathways to do that. How can they be scalable? A lot of these processes are probably we're going to just do a lot of trial and error. I hate to say it, but that's where we're at. And then there's some things that are going to be borne out, the methanol case, we can do that at scale. But then there's the feedstock challenge, the purity of the CO2 that we get, or the hydrogen, the cost of that, and if it's modular or adaptable to the process. And then, of course, the separations, whether it be the separations of your feedstock in or the product coming out, is really important because that's a huge expense. And then again, saying to the repurposing of current infrastructure and location. I think teaming is the best thing we're going to do going forward. I don't think any of us can do this alone. Maybe industry can do it alone. They have deeper pockets probably, but to help identify some of these challenges, we need them on board to understand that. I'm a chemist in the lab and I know how to fix a chemistry problem, but I don't know how to fix it at large scale. So transportation of those products, again, infrastructure, do we repurpose? TEA, Lca is going to get us there. And one thing I didn't go over is data management and understanding regulatory controls and digital transformation. So we need all of these things to make this happen. It's just not one problem. And then it goes to Christie's point earlier, the social and economic and environmental justice that happens in the end. So with that, I wanted to say thank you. I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Michelle. In the interest of time, we are going to skip Q&A. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to, or I assume I can say feel free to follow up with you after. And then if anyone online, there's Michelle's email. So I guess feel free to email her with any questions or comments as well. With that, our last but not least speaker is Eric Funkhauser, Managing Director of the Carbon Tech Development Initiative at Columbia University, to discuss some national partnership opportunities that he may have for some of our regional stakeholders.
So just from this first slide, you might be wondering, all right, why are you hearing from Columbia University, which is decidedly not in the Southeast, and why are you hearing from Eric Funkhauser, who is decidedly not Southern? But I will correct both of those impressions right now to tell you that I am Southern. I grew up in Southern Idaho. And also that while this is Columbia University and we are based in New York State, these are not opportunities that are limited to New York State. So that's why I asked the DOE folks to host me and let me come down and talk to you about these, because we do want to build national partnerships for the resources we're making available in New York State. So my organization is the Carbon Tech Development Initiative. I'm the managing director, but I'm actually going to talk about three related organizations that make up an ecosystem of support activities for carbon tech commercialization and carbon tech R&D that are all based in New York State. And just to clarify a little bit of the nomenclature, so when we say carbon tech, that's New York speak for all the stuff we're talking about today. So carbon tech from our verbiage relates to the carbon capture, conversion and utilization technologies. So there are three distinct organizations in New York State that I'm going to talk with you about. The first is the Carbon to Value Initiative. That's a longer standing initiative that predates the other two. Also Activate New York. And then finally my organization, which is the Carbon Tech Development Initiative. So just to kind of signpost one important thing about why New York is getting involved in the carbon tech R&D and commercialization space. So as we focus on the broader goals that New York State has for dealing with greenhouse gas mitigation, investing in the research and development and the professional development of experts and entrepreneurs who can accelerate this space is a focus that New York State has to have an organized effort around addressing long-standing, long-living carbon emissions. So that's how we're positioning this coordinated effort across this group of organizations. So just a tiny bit of background on that. So some of these initiatives have been rolled up from things that were long-standing, but it really catalyzed in 2021 with the finalization of $19.5 million of grants going out that kicked off the Carbon Tech Development Initiative and Activate New York. All of this in pursuit of the clean energy, climate, and just transition goals. So to get things started, talking about carbon to value. So the Carbon to Value Initiative is a focused organization that funds cohorts of carbon tech startups that benefit from Accelerator program, but particularly kind of focused around the bottom sentence on that first bullet, which is building a robust, powerful, and collaborative network. So the teams that are selected through a competitive selection process to be in the Carbon to Value Initiative, they join a 2-year cohort during which they receive dedicated support from the programs. And the orientation of that support, it's direct support for commercialization and accelerating the go-to-market strategies. And it focuses on those two things listed at the bottom of the how it works section on this slide. So first, there's value chain engagement. So this is an effort to help the cohort awardees to rapidly build up the know-how they need to succeed in their go-to-market strategies. So these are existing, these leverage an existing network called the Carbon Tech Leadership Council. And that network pulls together to help each awardee to develop a unique pathway into the market. And then secondly, to help industry move in the direction of where the startups in the cohorts are building their technologies to have a more receptive market on the industry side. So just a last note on this. So to give you a sense of how it's organized, the most recent cohort for the Carbon to Value Initiative selected eight different startups. So they'll be working this year in an initial ramp-up period with a cohort champion who is a direct industry mentor that's made this commitment. And that for this cohort, it's the EPC company Fluor. And then they also work directly with the Carbon Tech Leadership Council that I mentioned a minute ago. So that's one of the three organizations. So the next organization is Activate New York. Activate New York is completely different from what I just described with the Carbon to Value Initiative. So Activate focuses on the supply of human capital working in this space. So it funds fellows. So the fellows are given access to dedicated lab support and lab space at Columbia University, and provided a 2-year time horizon to provide dispensation to work on groundbreaking carbon tech innovation. So while they're part of the Activate Fellows program, they get the financial dispensation, the lab space, and they also receive direct training and support through resources and support programs made available in New York. So there are some eligibility requirements. You can see these are all focused on the competencies of the individuals. So they need some sort of background in a STEM field, and have to have a background doing applied work in industry on the technical side, or leading commercial development and go to market. It has to be an early company, so less than 2 million raised in debt or equity financing, and still in the development stage, not yet ready for full-scale product sales. Those are the eligibility criteria. And then to put a pin in how the type of folks who succeed in this program, it's important to kind of look at how who this was built for. So these funds are made available for folks who have a strong alignment with the imperatives that are outlined for Activate New York around developing the entrepreneurs. So having to make a case for that alignment for your career, and then having the technical experience, leadership experience, and some entrepreneurial credibility as well. So that's who we're looking for. That's who's funded. So both of the organizations that I just described, they also interact with my group. So my group is, again, different from the other two. We're trying not to overlap too much. So the Carbon Tech Development Initiative, we're the most recent. Our mandate is on the seeding side. So we seed research and development and commercialization funding. We are a perennial organization, so we're not a project or a program. The goal is to be a longstanding organization making investments of this size or larger well into the future. Our funding program will focus on commercialization of carbon capture, utilization, and storage for both early stage, which we would in this room call the TRLs 2 through 4, and mid and later stage technologies. The funds are non-diluting, and the resources that we develop to support the teams, whether on the research and R&D side or on the commercialization side, they all benefit from commercialization and research support programs that are set up with the expertise at Columbia University. So Columbia has a lot of high visibility experts in across the carbon tech development space, as well as a number of successful carbon tech spinoffs from recent years. So we have a grant making program and the accelerator, and the accelerator side. To put a finer point on how the funding goes out, our topic areas that we focus on fall into 3 primary carbon tech categories. First is the direct capture from direct air and ocean capture and industrial plants, carbon conversion, so building materials and minerals, and then mineral construction and chemicals and fuels. So we have a wide array of topic eligibility. So we encourage widespread, ambitious purposing of our goals to bring companies in to apply for funding. And we also will be spinning up resources to help accelerate the market intelligence to bring in to help the startups understand the value chains that they'll be interacting with, and bring more understanding of the carbon tech market as we start to build out some of the commercial avenues. So that's the overview. I try to go as quickly as I could to make up a little bit of time. Last note, do be on the lookout for, throughout the fall of this year, we have a number of funding announcements that will be forthcoming. There is a lot of exciting kind of flexibility and innovation in the way that we've set this up to encourage a lot of onshoring to New York and a lot of participation outside of New York. We're very interested in hearing from folks who are in the carbon tech space, irrespective of where you're based at. And looking forward to hearing from a lot of you. I'm not sure if I don't think my contact information made it onto the slides, but in the agenda, there's a link to my bio, which has the email address for contacting me at Columbia. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. You caught us right up to our ending time. So again, if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to Eric afterwards. I also have his contact information if anyone online would like to get in touch with him. So with that, I'm gonna stop talking and I'm gonna let Amishi close us out. Oh, and Sheila, we'll let you go first and then we'll end with Amishi.
Thank you so much. Thank you to our wonderful, outstanding presenters, world-class people, world-class ideas. It really took us to the next phase of where we need to go and how we need to think. Also for our participants that hung with us all day, and all of you who are there present in person. It means so much to us to see this type of participation, and we want to continue to work with you in the future and to aid DOE, aid the labs, and basically aid the world and the country in moving forward with CO2 reduction and management. And we thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Amishi, the floor is yours. I would use the lavalier, yeah. You might have to turn it on.
And now it's gonna take 2 minutes. Pretty much, it was just a minute, and I wanted to highlight first, thank you everyone in the audience, both virtually and here, for your participation. It was absolutely crucial in the whole point of having this. And second, I wanted to give a big shout out for Michelle and Alex. Thank you for facilitating. And finally, Aaron Fuller over there. Aaron has been the power horse behind all of these regional outreaches, and we have 3 more to go. So thank you, Aaron. I know that it will be long, but great. So appreciate it.